Welcome back, everyone, to Spooky Japan Podcast. We have our very special guest today, Nick Moulet from the Nick Files. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Not too bad. Thank you for joining us.
It's my absolute pleasure. It's especially a show like this. I seriously am very honored for it. Despite the fact I've been on two other shows prior to this today, but this one is definitely, is certainly a special one. So I appreciate you inviting me on.
It's definitely, you're probably one of those people that we asked to come back, to be honest. So definitely we'll always be scheduling with what you're doing, trying to get you back on the show as well. So
That's awesome. That happens to me with a lot of these shows.
Trying to keep a straight face, okay?
Hey, Lauren. I see Lauren's watching.
So what got you started into the paranormal?
So it actually started. I always usually say a lot of times that it started at age 12, but honestly, it has its origins even before that. How it all got started for me was growing up in the 90s, of course. In spite of how young I was back then, I was exposed to the X Files, which at that time that it was relatively brand new and still very popular. But not only was that the earliest introduction of the paranormal to me, but it was also the earliest introduction into the horror genre. Because also, and Irene will tell you, I'm a huge fan of horror movies too, which is one of the other podcasts I do, Fear Fans. But it kind of fast forwarding. I always do it this way, when it comes to getting involved. Fast forwarding a couple years into the early 2000s was when I ended up seeing my first paranormal show. Now, I didn't believe it at first, because to us it was just our typical show that we watched around Halloween, and that was the show Scariest Places on Earth. And if you remember that one, and alongside another horror series, which again introduced me, and this was on Nickelodeon, was the show Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I remember that show so well. It's funny because it was that show and Goosebumps was the same time as like My Little Pony in them, and all my friends be watching My Little Pony, but me, that's the one I was watching. I was like, I'd rather watch this.
Well, and it ran alongside the same time as the X Files did. I mean, it was 90s, man. We had some awesome shows then. So, but yeah,
what we're saying is that we need to bring back some of the 90s shows.
Really. I mean, Don of the show host of Fear Fans just showed me an episode of one of the older episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? So brought back a lot of good memories. But yeah, that introduced it. But yeah, those kind of shows at that time was when we only watched around Halloween. But now fast forwarding, when it really started, it started for me at age 12 in 2005. At this point, I was already, again, like I said, watching a lot of horror films. And one Friday night, I just happened to be, unlike most people where they have, most people will tell you when they get into it's because they had an experience when they were young themselves. This case for me, though, it was curiosity that brought me into it, because this Friday night in 2005, I just happened to be scrolling through the channels, and all of a sudden, I happened onto the Travel Channel, and this was back when they used to have only paranormal shows on Friday nights, not like what they have every day now, and and short time series, not these crazy series that have been on for these last few years. But I came across this series that's called Most Haunted, and I thought, I wonder what that is. That sounds interesting. So I sat down, just watched it, and before I knew it, it was like I was hooked on the series. And then when they had other paranormal series and documentaries I would play, on these Friday nights, it just drew me in like a magnet almost. And next thing you know, I always had to kind of go through this ritual. I needed to see these different shows. And before you know it, 2 years later, by age 14, I was on my first investigation, although they were part-time investigations. They only lasted for just a few minutes. And at 14 years old, and also a freshman in high school in 2007, I actually founded a paranormal club at my school. And here's the cool thing. That club is still running today.
Nice.
It's still running almost 20 years later. So, and I've heard it's been a lot of great success. apparently they still been keeping an eye on me because they said I become a well-known investigator. So they've been watching me ever since.
Nice.
But I guess really to kind of add more to the chapter was it really wasn't until again what really got to where I am today was again fast forwarding a few years later. And Irene, I know you've heard this story a lot of times, but what really I guess the best way I can say what really got me up to the top rank was when I was 17 years old. I had the opportunity to investigate Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and what better way to have your full night investigation, have your debut of a full night investigation than a place like Waverly. And
definitely, that's on my bucket list.
That place does not disappoint at all, and I don't know what it was about Waverly that night when we went back in 2010. It was almost like as if the stage was set. It was like there was so much activity it was like the building and the spirits knew that I want, because I said for months before that I was already getting, yes, I did a few investigations at, a few years prior. I watched a lot of the TV shows. I did a lot of my studies and I learned a lot of it. And I was starting to become a believer. But in order for me to become a full believer, I needed to have my own personal experience, like see a full body apparition. I already told myself there's no guarantee, of course, that's going to happen, snap of a finger. But Waverly, again, it's like the building knew what I was looking for. And it's still considered one of my best investigations, and we got it all on tape, which to this day we've only seen about 10% of that footage. I've actually been calling it the Lost Paranormal tape, which because we were using an old-fashioned video camcorder which still had the little cassette tapes inside of it.
I know what you're talking about because I used to investigate and get some really good footage back in the day. And everyone's like, well, what happened to it? Can you show it now? And I'm like, it disappeared because it's like you said, it's like one of those tape things. I'm like, I can't. Yeah. I don't know what happened to it. It disappeared.
Yeah, we only saw 10% of that footage. And although it was, an old-fashioned camera, it did, however, had night vision to it. So, which was, of course, a plus. But yeah, we just haven't had the opportunity of transferring onto a disc. But I am hoping one day to get that footage. And if we captured something really good, or even if we didn't, I'm hoping to use that footage to eventually make a documentary out of it, because this is probably the closest that you can really get for a first-time investigator going on his first investigation, especially at only 17 years old. It's not very common you see very many people at that age to go to a place like that.
Right.
But, I think it was calling out to you. I think it knew that it knew you, and it was waiting for you to come.
I honestly believe it to this day. And what made it even better than later at night than when we were there was when we first got there, there was probably about 20 or 30 other investigators that were coming to investigate Waverly. Funny thing was, at that time I had to lie about my age because it was 18 and over. Even though I was a few months away from turning 18, it still didn't matter. So we had to lie about my age to get in. But the next thing I knew, by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, most of those investigators had left. And before I knew it, I did not expect this to occur. But except for the guides that were working there at the time and my dad, we had the entire building all to ourselves. I mean, it's like, when do you ever get an opportunity to get one of the most famous haunted locations in the world all to yourself? So again, it was.
And that's when they come up the most.
They did.
When you're alone and everybody's not there, and so they can have one-on-one conversation with you, and interaction with you.
One of the first things I did remember when we were there was we went up to the 4th floor of the building. That was our first spot. Now, at that time, because I know we've all been following through with what Waverly's been going through lately, but at that time, Waverly in 2010 was still in really bad shape. I mean, when we went there, the whole building, the insides was covered in dust. Parts of the walls and ceilings were chipped off. The stairs were inaccessible. Now they are, they fixed up so much of it, which I was amazed to see years later. But the 4th floor, we were with a few investigators, and one of the guides came up to us, and we had our flashlights, obviously. And I said, they said, it would probably be best if you guys have the flashlights off. So we shut off the flashlights, camera rolling, and I don't know if I ever did capture it, but you could definitely hear my reaction on tape. But really not long after we turned off these lights, we start seeing like multiple figures like going in different directions. Some were going to the right, some were going to the left, some were coming towards us, others were coming away from us. And before you know it, as you would probably hear from the video, you hear me literally gasping. Not with a gasp of fright, though. It was literally excitement because I was witnessing, basically what would be shadow people. And for a first timer, at that time, for me to witness something like that, that was just such an unbelievable experience. I really had to stop and think for a second, like, am I really seeing this? Because at this point, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, so I knew it was not hallucinations. But
right.
It was a pure reaction of excitement. Like, I can't believe I'm seeing this right now. So yeah, like you said, Irene, perhaps it did know that it was waiting for me.
And they could smell you a mile away, and you say, I'm going to go to Waverly Hills. But, when you say that, they're already waiting for you. They already know that. So that's one of the things that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it was definitely a good way to start off. And again, I always will give that credit, that kind of helped me put to where I am today. And of course, obviously I went over a decade later, and it just brought back a lot of memories while I was there. So it's just an awesome location.
And you may find that it's not full of negative energy. There's sad energy too, but it's not really minus, right?
If there was any negative energy like that I did feel there, it probably was very brief. It's definitely more positive. There is negative energy, but it's rare when you encounter it. You encounter more of the positive energy, and but nonetheless, it was definitely a great place. And of course, that I have a story to tell because it was actually a week after the school year began that year. So like here I was starting my last year of high school, and then a week later I come back and tell this incredible story about Waverly. So and it's just and then just a year later was when I joined my first paranormal team, which was the Midnight Paranormal Society. Not the one down in Texas, of course, different one entirely. And also, I went to college, and they actually had paranormal classes there. So some people also asked me on several occasions, like, how did you learn a lot of this stuff? I not only just studied this stuff independently, I also sometimes say that I trained at the Paranormal Academy. That's basically where it comes down to.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing I always say going to investigation is the spirits will see your energy before you even walk in that place. And that's why you really can't investigate with everyone, is especially if you can feel energy, you're just like, there's certain people you just want to stay away from, and spirits are the same way. If you walk in there with not the best energy, they're probably not going to really want to respond to you compared to someone else with better energy.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was almost kind of the response I was hoping, like the type, not necessarily that kind of response, but a response I was hoping to get when I went back to Waverly 3 years ago in 2021, as if it, a way of saying, you guys remember who I was all those years ago, that kind of thing. Because I was hoping I'd get some kind of, some type of way of saying, we remember you from a decade ago. So I don't know if I ever truly got that response, but we still definitely had a number of things that went on there. So it's just an amazing place.
I've always wondered if spirits, like you said, you go back like a decade later, you're always wondering, I wonder if they do remember me, or it's just one of those things where they see so many people they don't really remember who I specifically am.
I even said at one point, I mean, I was jokingly saying it, but again, I'm probably not the first to say this at a place like this, but again, you come back at a place after you haven't been there for over 10 years. I literally, got out of the car, stood at the building, looked up to it, and literally just said the classic, "Honey, I'm home." So as a way to like say, do you remember who I am? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you still get to go out to investigate today, or just haven't really been able to go out and do that?
I would like to make another visit there, but as of right now, I just haven't had the opportunity. But I'm hoping sometime in the future. Um, it'll definitely not waiting another 10 years, that's for sure. But it will happen though. Again, though, I know for a fact I will return.
Sit.
There is a place in Illinois I'm going to have to recommend to you to investigate. It's an old. It used to be a. It was a lodge. What? I'm trying to think of the name of the group of people.
I think I know which place you're talking about. It's not Willow Creek Farm, is it?
No, this place is newer. This guy, and I kind of found him. This guy, he's been trying to get people to go there to investigate. And it's super haunted, but because it's brand new, he doesn't really know how to advertise. Like, he doesn't get a lot of people out there.
Trying to think exactly which place that could be, because I know there's a few other lodges like that throughout the state. I mean, it could literally be any one of them, but I think I have sort of an idea. I just don't know exactly which one it is.
Oh, this one's newer. Not a lot of people have heard of it yet. I finally got. He had one guy go out there who was a TikToker. He did a lot of locations. He said it was the most haunted location he's been to. So then finally, I was able. It's Masonic Lodge.
Oh, is that the one in?
Brooks,
is that the one in Indiana? Actually, I think it's in Brookston.
Brookston, yes, that's what I'm talking about.
I was just there 2 weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah, I was. We got.
Yeah, I've been recommending that to people because until I met him and started to recommend him, he had like one guy go out there. Finally, I got some more people go out there, and they kind of start spreading the word. Like, yeah, this place is, from what they've told me. They told me it's extremely haunted.
Yeah, we had the opportunity to go, like I said, about 2 weeks ago, and we are making a second visit there at the beginning of May. So we are going back. I'll actually give you an example. I'll even give you guys a great description of what it was like when we were there, or exactly when. If you guys remember those cute pictures I took with that cat that was on my lap, that was right outside the Masonic Lodge.
Because a lot of people take a picture of that cat and they call it the paranormal cat of that location.
Oh, really? I didn't see. I never knew anything about the cat before we got there. It just showed up, and I got to tell you,
that's what a lot of people said though too. They opened the door and let the cat in because they're just like, it just comes at night. So
yeah, she is like the friendliest cat I've ever met in my entire life. I mean, we hated that we had to leave her when we had to call it a night, but as far as investigations go, I mean, we didn't really get to have. I mean, I know Jeremy and his crew was able to investigate for a period of time. For us, we ended up showing a little bit later than expected. But we did what do they call that? Oh my God, it's like right in front of me. The the spirit box where you have the eye mask over you. You know what I'm talking? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I can't believe I can't even remember it's a type of method. I can't believe I can't remember the name.
Method?
The Estes method. That's correct.
Is that what it is? Estes?
That's what it is.
Like
Yeah, well, for starters, this was my first time doing the Estes method, but we did something a little different compared to like how most people do it. Instead of having the eye mask and have headphones over, this time we still had the headphones. We didn't wear the eye mask, but this time what we did was we had two different, myself and someone else doing Estes method in two different separate rooms, doing it simultaneously to see if we can get like any different types of responses. And the responses we got from my side and the other person's side, some of them were equally similar, but there were others that were quite different. So it was that was an interesting response.
I'm glad people are starting to go out there, though. That's definitely from what I've heard and what people have shown me, evidence-wise. It's definitely a good location to go and investigate. So I'm glad that's starting to get out there now too, about that location. Because someone showed me, and it was one of the guys' voice where they clearly had it, and the team member said, "Do you want me to continue playing music?" And they heard him clearly say, "No, shut the F up, you B."
Wow. Jeez.
Like, it was audible as a whole sentence, and they showed it to me like, yeah, we got this whole clear sentence from him.
That is insane. We definitely didn't get anything like that. Although, well, we didn't get like a full sentence like that, but there were times that at one point when we went downstairs to the basement of the Masonic Lodge, for a while we didn't really get many responses. But then we realized there might have been a good reason why we weren't getting very many responses, or, whether it was from a spirit box or if it was from, any type of sounds or anything. It was because, and it's not surprising, it was because we had a woman with us. And as we all know, when it comes to Masonic lodges, in their operating times, women are not allowed to be part of the Freemasons. So it was very likely that we actually might have pissed them off that we were allowing a woman into the basement. But she made the decision herself of going back upstairs to the safe room, as we always call it, where all our stuff's at. So she went upstairs, and we got a few responses. And just recently, I got a photograph from one of the crew members that they got a picture of what, of course, we can't say for sure, but it did look like that. There was a black shadow figure that was standing next to her, not close, but kind of just a few inches away from her right shoulder. So it was obvious that something was down there with us.
The reason why I'm also interested in location for people to go out there is the owner said that there is a male spirit there that seems to be, they call him the main guy because he seems to be like the boss of everyone, like all the spirits in there. Where if that spirit tells someone you can't talk to him, or you can't talk at all, or now you can talk, and I'm just like, I want to know who or what that is to have that much authority over all the other spirits at that location that everyone listens to him. That's who I'm mostly interested in. I'm like, how do you have this much authority?
Exactly, and it's very likely that could have been that could have been standing next to that crew member and was kind of, running the rules that, like, even after death, that this was not a place that women were allowed to be part of, because
that's why they assumed that he was probably one of like the head Freemasons back in the day, to have that much authority of that place where he is literally the boss. And I'm like, that still makes me wonder, and I have to know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing about the Masonic Lodge, and I'll just throw it out, it's not surprising, however, but when we went through the lodge, I mean, unfortunately, it's not in the best shape, obviously, because it's been closed for so many years. A lot of parts inside have been kind of falling apart. Mm-hmm. But, in the end, though, I mean, it's still definitely a place worth to investigate. I even asked Jeremy at one point, saying, is the owner going to try to, get the place fixed up or cleaned up eventually? As he says, as of right now, he said, no, that's not happening anytime soon. But I think he is looking for someone who could try to, put some money together to eventually have some restoration project. But who knows when that's going to be.
Right now, he just uses it for his appliance repair business, from my understanding.
Yeah, the basement, he usually uses it. There's a lot of I mean, I hate to say the term, a lot of junk downstairs in the basement. I mean, I'll be honest, there was not a point when I was walking down there where, at least on one occasion, I kicked a piece of debris of some sort. So that goes to show. But again, it's also kind of a salvage area. That's also like a repair shop too.
What has been your favorite place to investigate so far?
So my favorite, in addition to Waverly, one of my other favorite locations I like going to, which this is actually a place I haven't gone to for the last few years, but I've been trying to get back into it. And so now my Things of Illinois crew is Joliet Prison, which that place, it was only about 6 years ago that they just recently opened that place for investigations. Until then, it had been closed for like 20 years. And for the most part, nobody was allowed to go inside. But they started taking this opportunity again in 2018, where they started allowing both history and paranormal tours and investigations. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm claiming credit. I'm just basically telling the truth. But I was actually one of the very first investigators to investigate Joliet Prison when they first opened for the tours. And again, that place, it's an awesome place. I mean, I didn't.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I loved that place. I don't know what it is about old prisons that seem to have a lot of energy in it.
Well, see, most people would actually know about Joliet Prison, not necessarily for the paranormal or paranormal, but part of its history, because it was featured, believe it or not, in the prison gate opening scene in the movie The Blues Brothers, while the prison was still in operation at that time.
I didn't know that part. I knew about the paranormal part. Maybe I researched more in paranormal than knowing it was part of a movie. So yeah, that's actually interesting to know.
Yeah, they used that for the Blues Brothers sequence, and I even had the opportunity on one time to actually open the gate, which was an old-fashioned, handle that they used. But, yeah, the investigations we had there, I mean, it just seemed like it definitely got more crazier. It got a lot more intense. The only reason why we haven't gone back in the last few years is, I hate to say it, but unfortunately we were thrown out. Not because we did anything wrong or anything like that, because obviously we know better than to cause trouble. It was, and again, I'm sure we've experienced this every once in a while when it comes to certain locations like this. We were thrown out by the Joliet Historical Society, and honestly, these guys, I don't know if they're still there, but they were not the brightest people. They were kind of mean-spirited, and I seem to have no more knowledge in history of this prison than they did. I mean, I think either they were annoyed by our presence, or they probably knew that I did my homework, and it was almost that situation where they were like, you know too much. You need to get out of here. That kind of thing. So it was unfortunate, because when I was telling a lot of the history of the history of Joliet Prison, a lot of people were fascinated by it. If not, I honestly believe, and again, I'm not trying to say this for like fame or anything like that, but if not for me telling a lot of the stuff and basically helping these historical people out, society out, they probably wouldn't really get as many visitors to the prison.
Yeah. It's always interesting. It takes some people will struggle, but it takes like the one good team out there, and then that's when the place starts getting more busy to book up for investigations.
Yeah, they still get they've still been doing investigations. Again, we're still, even 6 years later, we're still trying to get back in. In spite of the success that we made, we were only there for a couple weeks. Of course, obviously couldn't have came at a perfect time, because they started opening up for the tours and investigations close to Halloween, which not only was a perfect time, but also it was perfect because obviously with the summer being, over, it wasn't hot. There were some nights where it was extremely cold, but I'd rather take the cold than the heat, obviously. So, but after the first week in November, we got that notification that they were not going to allow us back in, which at that time I didn't understand. And at first I kind of felt guilty, because I thought, could I have done this because of all my knowledge? But I think it was not only just that. I think it was among a number of other things. So, but like I said, even 6 years later, we're still working our way to try to get back in there and start the investigations up. There was even one time that when we walked through that prison, that when we were out in the courtyard, again, I saw several not only did I see several shadow figures going across the yard, But just seeing how wide this yard is, especially since this was a maximum security prison. I mean, yes, you have to remember it was a prison back in the day, but with all the room that it had, I even said to myself, this would be a great place for like a Paracon to be at, or even a movie screening, or a concert of that kind of thing. I mean, it's just, I just saw it not only just as a very popular paranormal hotspot, but I saw it really had a lot of potential for other events and things.
It's sad that there is a lot of respectful people in the paranormal community at locations, but it's sad that there's also a lot of people who get locations taken away due to how disrespectful they've been. And it ruins it for everyone, which makes it so sad for me.
Yeah, when I was telling the history of this place to the visitors that we had, I looked over on a few occasions, saw the historical society, and they're just standing there staring at me, giving me a rather nasty look, as if they think I was taking over their job, which I was not. All I was trying to do was literally help them out. They should have appreciated it. And instead they just gave me this ugly glare, which is, and that's kind of contributed to the loss of Joliet. I don't know if they're still there. I'm hoping maybe that they found some better minded people. And if we're ever able to talk to them and see if we can get investigations started again, that would definitely be great, because I really do miss Joliet Prison. And I know it is. I know, of course, it's now been on some of the paranormal shows on the TV, on the Travel Channel, but I don't really bite, with the exception of maybe one or two of the shows, I don't really bite too much into like what the show's evidence is, because again, I think it's really something you got to see for yourself.
And I think we as investigators, we as researchers, kind of like know a little bit more than the people who are so-called historical society people, because we take everything into and we research everything. It's not just the surface. I think you have to go deeper, and the way that we study it is more in depth than what they do. And I think they get kind of jealous and think, "What are you doing? You're trying to show us up?" Or say something like that too, because I found I had the same effect with the people who at the first time when I went on the USS Lexington, that they were investigators who volunteered, who worked on the aircraft carrier, but they didn't like what I knew, and they were asking me questions about certain people that has passed away. And I used to tell them what when it happened. They said, "How do you know?" Well, I don't know, because I just know. Like, and it's just like, it's like you're showing them up, and you don't intend to do that. You just want to help them, right?
Exactly.
But they don't see it that way. They really don't see it that way. They see it as more of a threat.
I feel like a lot of them are also used to, like, paranormal investigators just going in for the thrill, not knowing anything before they go in, compared to, I want to say, like, the more seasoned ones who will research the place before we go in. So this way, if we hear like a certain name, we at least have a clue on who that is, compared to, I just heard this name and I don't know who it is. But now you're in a location and you hear them say a name, like, oh, I kind of think I know who you are. Or this makes sense because of it was like this back in the day.
Yeah. And,
right.
I don't think they really appreciate how much we can help them. But in a way, they said, "Yeah, what are you trying to show me up or something?" I said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to tell you what I know, and what I know, I'm going to share it with you." And they said, and then they said, "Well, I'll give you my email address." When I got their email address, they kind of like snubbed me over and said, "Okay, yeah."
They just give the email address, kind of keep you quiet for the time being.
Yeah. It's really nothing that.
Yeah, it's just really unfortunate, because again, we were going in with the ultimate respect, obviously, unlike some of these other people out there, like what Josh just said, people in the field need to respect the dead, because
Exactly.
there's many others out there. And I know I'm not the first to say this, and I know we're all very familiar with it, but you got people out there in the field that are doing this obviously for the fame, or saying, hey, check this out, I'm at this place, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for me, that's not what it was all about. I was not there for that at all. It was, I mean, yes, it was definitely a thrill for the first time, but even then, I was still going in with the most ultimate respect of this place, especially, after 20 years that this building had been abandoned, because the prison originally, I'll just say this, originally operated from 1858 up until 2002. It was originally meant to close down decades earlier, because we have Statesville Prison, which is, although it is a historic prison, it's still in operation. That's one of our maximum security prisons here in the state of Illinois. And Statesville was designed to replace Joliet Prison, because Joliet was a smaller prison. But for some reason whatsoever, that plan didn't go through like they were like they were originally planning to. Now, Statesville is now almost a 100-year-old prison. It was built in 1925. So it probably would have replaced Joliet 100 years earlier. So do the math, obviously, of how long Joliet Prison would have been closed. But for some reason, it just never closed down as originally scheduled, and it continued on for many decades until it eventually closed in 2002. And up until the tours, it was closed and just remained basically rotting to the present day.
I find that what I do is almost like a storyteller, to answer questions, to find out why, who, where, when, and everything else like that. And I think that it's not just investigating, it's not just finding spirits, it's more like telling their story.
Right.
And they have, like, history books can only do so much, okay? I think the investigator, if you have a touchy-feely, if you do that, I think you show them that maybe it did happen, but I'm going to tell how the spirit told me, what they told me, how they acted, what happened to them, their book. And I think that's very important, to have people find out, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to me, this is how I died, and this is my life. And to show that part is really what it's all about, more than finding spooks in a building. I don't know.
That's correct.
And to give them a name, to give them an age, to give them the figure, a person, because they were people, right? Not just a thing, not just a cloud of dust or something. To give them a name, and to give them a person, to show them this is who they were, this is what they did, and this is what happened to them. I think that gives them more of a reach out to say, okay, I'll be more at peace because of that, because you did that for me. And I think that's important.
Well, and if you look at a place like Joliet Prison, I mean, obviously, in its days, it operated as a maximum security prison. It was, yes, we all have to remember, what these guys were originally in for, because, committing crimes or whatever. But I'm sure there were certain inmates that, who showed remorse, regret for what they did. And it probably was not, even in the afterlife, they're still trapped there. They're still serving their sentences, and they, as a result, they don't really get visitors. So, like, as understandably, they see people like us walk in, from, even if we're in the living world and they're on the other side, it's definitely a blessing for them, because when was the last time that they really had a visitor, especially, before 2002. And there's a story I even remember from that prison, that because this prison being built in the 1850s, no surprise, it was comprised of limestone. And the story goes, when they originally built that prison, a lot of the inmates that a lot of the prison, like many of them back in the day, were made with prison labor. But as rough as that may have seemed for the inmates, that was actually the greatest thing ever, because before that, they were serving their sentence down in the very first state prison here in Illinois, which is the Alton State Prison, which is part of Alton, Illinois, one of the most haunted small towns in America. All there's left today is just a corner piece of it. The rest of the prison is gone, sadly. But when that prison was in operation, the conditions were just absolutely terrible. You know, they had to go through really rough conditions. There was supposedly torture that was going on, inhumane things, and the Department of Corrections, if it was called that back then, came up to a lot of these inmates and said, "How'd you guys? You guys still need to serve your sentence, but how do, at the very least, you guys would like to leave this place, because we've heard about what's going on with you. But under the condition, if you could help build us another prison." So they transferred a lot of those inmates from Southern Illinois back up to Northern Illinois, and they didn't care if they had to work in the coldest or hottest days of the year, you know, if they had to work to exhaustion. All they cared about was wanting to get out of this place, because it was just so bad there, and building a prison to them, that meant more than anything, because most importantly too, they got to be outside, which was something they probably never had that opportunity. So that prison is, you know, just the work. It really goes down to all of the work that was done in this prison, and that's what I think really creates a lot of that particular energy at Joliet Prison.
I think it goes to the fact for any place that is haunted, that they have a story to be told, and it's up to us to be responsible to bring that story out and to tell everybody what happened and to tell their lives. It doesn't matter if it's prison, it doesn't matter if it's a hospital, it doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter if it's a house or a building. It's the same thing. Like, we respect all dead, okay? I don't care what you think about it, but you have to respect all dead, and you have to. There is good or bad, right? Good or bad. It's always a story for them, for them to tell, and I think they're willing to tell you if it's the right timing and the right environment. They're willing to tell you if you're willing to listen.
Exactly, it really is.
And
no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. And and just show them some kind of respect. It doesn't matter. Just show them some kind of respect, and say, you're a jailbird. Yeah, you can go blank yourself. No, we don't do that. We don't do that here. This is not what we do. And that's it. And if you do that, you should be in this kind of business. Period.
Exactly. Because, and think about it too, I mean, especially, when it comes to like a lot of these, not just Joliet Prison, but a lot of these haunted prisons. Again, imagine what these guys really went through in later life. Even if they were still bad people in the end, just the lifestyle that they had to live, knowing that they were, never going to see the light of day again, that prison was their home, and they weren't going to have any, their freedom was taken away. So as a result of that, even if these were not the best people, you still got to show that respect. In fact, I actually wanted to say I know there's that, I did this on the other show I was on.
Okay.
I also put this on my page. I know there's that special feature on StreamYard. You can have it broadcast on your own Facebook page. And I got a few viewers here. One of them's Robert White, actually. And he just, I'm not sure why. They don't show the comments are not showing up. But he says from my side that it might give them closure with their tale told.
Exactly. And you got to remember, back when, if somebody said, "Yeah, he's a rotten jerk," they went as far as believing that other guy without any evidence, right?
Right.
You could be labeled even though you were just there at the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't mean that you did something bad. It doesn't mean that you're a criminal. they just labeled you as that and threw you in jail, or else you'll be killed, or else you'd be forced to have the electric chair. It doesn't matter. And
Exactly.
they didn't really care about evidence or anything like that, right?
It's
And
like
that's the
you
way.
were just there, and to them, they just saw you as, I'm trying not to use the right and bad words, but it's like they just saw you like you were a piece of trash, and they just threw you away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many of them who died who were really innocent, right? How many of them were thrown in there because somebody lied or something like
Right.
that? And that back when that was normal, right?
Right. Well, and think about it too. This is also something else you got to think about. You kind of also can't help but wonder how old were a lot of these guys, because back then they didn't really have like what we have now, where you have juvenile hall, or you have the adult prisons. It didn't really matter how old you were. You were thrown in to a maximum security prison. You could be as young as 10 years old. They really didn't have a number at that time.
No.
If they thought or suspected that you did something, whether the evidence was clear or not, it wouldn't matter. You'd be thrown in with like 300 other inmates that may have actually done crimes and were probably even worse, at the top of the food chain. And here you got these poor kids that were suffering.
And it was like kangaroo court, actually.
Exactly. It was.
And sometimes I just think,
Well, there was actually a story I remember from Joy, and we had a medium with us. And this medium, again, I know people have different views on them. But this one that I was working with, just the way how she described everything, it really made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
She said at one point that she felt, obviously the presence of an inmate, but she claimed that whoever this inmate was wrongfully in prison. He wasn't supposed to be there. And so a few days later, I decided to do some historical research on it. And if I'm correct, this might have been the same person that I found. And what's funny was that it was even featured. This guy was, through the historical research, this guy was even featured on an episode of the Dead Files. But it involves, in fact, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to share the screen.
Sure.
So from what I remember hearing from the episode and also from my research, the one person that kind of fits my bill on this was that in November of 1955, there was at first there was an 8-year-old girl named Janice Elizabeth Bay who was unfortunately beaten and sexually assaulted. And I have a photo of what she looked like before she died, which is just, it's tragic that she died this way. And she was unconscious but alive, taken to the hospital, but sadly died an hour later. Now, they ended up arresting a 29-year-old cab driver by the name of Lloyd Eldon Miller. I mean, a 29-year-old named Lloyd Eldon Miller Jr., who was a taxi cab driver. Now, I got a photo of him now on Find a Grave. Now, he does look kind of suspicious, and even if he didn't commit this, there were some problems with him. Now, this guy really wasn't what I would call at least a part-time criminal, because he was a high school dropout. He joined the Coast Guard and the Army, but went AWOL 3 separate times. In his early 20s, he stole a car with a friend in California and spent 7 months at a prison farm. And even strangely, he got married 4 times, and a couple of these marriages were that of women he only met for the past few days, which definitely is bizarre. Now, his dream, here's the other thing too, to connect with him. The medium that I was with was that she said that this guy apparently had dreams of wanting to work on cars and stuff, on vehicles. This guy, his dream was to work as an auto mechanic in Detroit, but he drifted from job to job as a laborer. Now, after the murder, they ended up finding him 150. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong button. They ended up, they ended up finding him 150 miles away at a bus station trying to get a bus ticket to go to Detroit, and they arrested him. Yeah. After 2 days of interrogation, he confessed to the murder. Now, later on, he recanted and said he was coerced into this confession.
Yeah.
but he was convicted and sentenced to the electric chair at Statesville Prison in 1956, but was sent to Joliet State Prison to await his execution. Now, in 1963, he tried to ask for a state of appeal because he claimed there was lack of evidence. He was falsely, in prison, but the state turned it down and denied it. Now, eventually, it was found that the prosecution messed up some of the evidence. In 1967, the Supreme Court stepped in and overturned the conviction. As a result, he's a free man. And then a few years later, in 1971, all charges of the murder against him were dropped. He wound up moving to Mexico, got married a fifth time, and became a minister for several years, and even actually wrote a book about his experiences that occurred there in 1994. But he eventually moved back to the States and died in 2013 at the age of 86. And when I related that information to the medium, she said, that's probably most likely our guy. But yeah, unfortunately for this poor kid, though, Janice May, to this day, it's still an unsolved murder. No one's ever been charged with it.
He's telling me that I didn't do this crime. It was somebody else. He's telling me that right now. And she's coming in and she's telling me that was a different guy who killed me. She's telling me that it was he had blonde hair. He had medium height. And he was kind of like a scrawny guy. That's what she's telling me right now.
That could be very likely because, like I said, I mean, I did check too, like if cops back then ever looked into this case, saw anyone else, but like I said, not as far as we can tell. So to this day, it's still an open case.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because the only way you're going to find out is from talking to her.
Yeah. I think we probably brought closure to Lloyd Elton Miller Jr., because if this was the guy that the medium was describing about, I think we finally got the word out that he didn't commit this murder. Yes, he did kind of have a rough past before then, with all the other things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, he was directly involved with this murder.
Criminal, that he really did anything. I think he was in the wrong place. I think whatever happened, it was like probably something that he probably looked like the other guy or whatever, but it was totally different. This guy's totally different than him, and I know it because I could see it. And she's telling me, no, he's totally different. This guy was a little bit more. This guy was creepier, and he had beady eyes. She's saying to me right now. So yeah. And if I had more time, I'd talk to her more, and she'll give out more information. Maybe I'll tell you after it's Nick, if whatever I can find out. I'll talk to you about it later on the Messenger. But yeah,
sure.
She's right here. She's right here in front of me. I could see her right here, and she's telling me everything and all this kind of stuff she's telling me. And she's in tears because she's telling me this. And I don't know why. And that's what she's telling me. And yeah, it was just, I don't know what to tell her.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, it's so, you can feel it right in here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so painful.
I still can't, I know for a fact, I believe there's obviously still family members of this poor kid that went through it. So all I got to say is that, to this day, I hope the remaining family members will be able to still, find some kind of peace, even though it's still over almost 70 years later, even though I'm sure it's still very difficult for them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's really raw to her. It's really raw to her because she's showing me what he did to her. And this is like a public podcast, and I can't. I'm not going to tell you what happened to her because I know, because she's showing me what happened to her.
Right.
And I'm not going to say anything right here because it would be like PG, right?
Yeah. Well, nonetheless, though, I mean, I think we definitely had found some, and I would tell that story. I mean, the story on numerous occasions at the prison because I felt like it needed to be told. And like I said, I think that was just one of those stories that apparently the Joliet Historical Society didn't know about and didn't like that I was telling them. So again, all I was just doing was pass that information, and that was it. And even though we got thrown out of Joliet prison for it, I still do this type of research to this day with other with other locations.
And I think we have to talk, we have to tell the truth, and we have to make sure that yes, this is what happened to you. Yes, I'm going to make sure that everyone knows, and yes, we're going to put a closure for you, right?
Exactly.
And that's what I get. I get a lot of these spirits come to me and telling me things, and I go, yeah, but I don't know how to even begin to find out where and what and how what happened, right? So
Right.
it's almost like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, because you get pieces here and pieces there, and it's really difficult. I'm sitting here, I'm rallying my brain. I go, yeah, but I'm going to need more information than that.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot. It's really a lot.
Yeah, and it's almost like giving you a huge headache because you don't know how to start and how to begin and where it all ends. I just sometimes I say I can't, and until I find it's something more, I can't. And I usually get, sometimes I do cold cases too, and they're, yeah, tell me about it. Right?
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
And they're really hard. And right now I'm on this one case where this guy was killed by it in Alaska, and I have to find out more from him what he means by it. And I'm working on those two at the same time. It's like,
yeah, that's interesting.
You didn't get to sleep, right? No, sorry. I'm like, yeah, it's from this side of the pond. Like, you never find either. No, we're not going to do this here. No, you're not going to show me this way. No. And then I'm getting beaten up left, right, and center because they're showing me how they were killed. They go, no, you're not going to do it. No, not going to. Nope, that hurts. Like, stop it. Yeah. It's not a regular conversation, right? You wish it was.
I just got this comment from Robert, just from my side, so you guys know. Robert White says, "Be careful they don't throw you out of one prison straight into another, Nick."
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, make sure you have enough money so you can get out of there.
Had to make bail.
I investigated an old jail before. And I was kind of sad because I didn't get as much evidence, but it's because even like the tour guide who runs it even said the spirits of the prisoners don't mess with the women. The males, yes. The males, she's heard screaming, she ran out, and one of the spirits had someone in the air choking him as a man. But women, no matter what a woman did or said, they try to stay away from it compared to, like, maybe if you went in there compared to me, you get a lot more evidence because they don't care about scaring you.
Yeah.
Right,
you're scared, good. Me, they're like, no, we're not going to do that to a woman.
It's probably like, and obviously, this still occurs in some prisons. I guess it's probably like a code of conduct that's probably being passed around, saying
Mm.
it was like that there, where the women, they're like, no, we're not going to risk scaring them. We're not going to risk doing that. But a man, they did not scare.
Yeah, it's like it's just like it's just like a lot of modern day gangs. They have this code of conduct that women and children are innocent, and no matter what the reason is, they should not be touched. but
Yeah.
men are always an easy target, unfortunately.
But if you're a guy, oh, you know, anything goes, right?
Yeah.
There are places like that here too. If you're a guy, you know, God, I feel sorry for you.
Well, and that's kind of the case, like what I was saying about the Masonic Lodge. I mean, that's actually one of the rare cases where, you know, like I said before, we didn't really have much activity when we were downstairs in the basement because we had a female investigator with. And again, whoever that leader was, or if there were others involved, they were not going to present us that they were there because, like I said, as part of the Masonic culture, you know, women are not allowed to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's why they also get more mad, from what I've seen, more mad towards women being in there.
I know for a fact that, now I'm not a big expert, obviously, when it comes to Masonic culture. I know I've always known and it's still like this today, that it's always been a male organization. You know, men and boys are allowed. Women and girls, I've heard, are not allowed to be part. But I have heard recently there are sometimes they might have some meetings or events where they might allow females into it, but not basically a very common thing. Yes, they've been kind of becoming a little bit more open, but even then, they're still not allowed to become Freemasons themselves. The way how I see it.
The true Freemason that was in there, the ones that they suspect was a Freemason, they just did not seem happy when women were in there. That's what I've seen from different investigators, and what they've shown me was the evidence they got was women. I don't feel like, especially when they were back then, where they still had that mindset of you're a woman, you should not be in my building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. I hate to use the term, but it was almost like you were kind of like property, or just almost like an object, practically. So
yeah,
I guess these Freemasons, although things have, you know, pretty much changed in a way where sometimes, again, women are allowed to be part of some of their meetings. This Masonic temple, in this case, whatever's there, this group of Masonic Freemasons were still abiding by the old-fashioned strict code of conduct that no woman allowed at all, ever.
And it'd be funny to find out, you know, if you're a woman and you stand in a room all by yourself, what kind of energy you get, or what kind of interaction you get, if it would be positive or negative, right? That'd be cool to find out.
It'd be different compared to if let's say Nick and I investigated. I sat there by myself in a room. Then Nick sat in the room. Definitely, I think with him being a male, he'd get different interaction from the same spirit. They more likely they would just let me. We're like what I've seen with women. They kind of let them know, I don't want you here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that was, like I said, I think that's what really may have happened that night with the Masonic Lodge. It really would explain why it was so quiet downstairs, and then when she left, that's when the activity started acting up, because the rest of us were men, so they were obviously a lot more comfortable when it was just the guys downstairs in the basement.
Yeah. I think that's a lot about other places too, where men would have more interaction than females would, and that a lot of places like here you'd find a lot more men they'd pass, but then in other places they get more attacked. You know, depending on where you are, you men would get attacked, or they go up after men, right? And to bye, you know, like you're not going to be fun the next day, forget it, right? That's what happens here a lot. And a lot of times if men and women go together, you'd get either would something not normal would happen to one or the other, right? So it's just it goes on. It goes on, right?
Well, and there was also what's kind of interesting also too about the Masonic Lodge that I went to. it did remind me of a similar location, which also was a Masonic Lodge too. This time it was called, but it was not just a Masonic Lodge. It was an opera house called the Rossville Opera House down in Rossville. The guy who owned it, he had it open for investigations for a number of years. Unfortunately, it's been a decade since I've gone down there. And also, the guy whose name is Dave, sadly, he's also no longer with us. He passed away, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. I think that might have been. But at the time that we went twice. The responses we got from that place were certainly different, because even though this was a Masonic Lodge and we had female investigators with us that night, it seemed like whatever, those spirits are, I think, more open-minded, because, like I said, it wasn't just a Masonic Lodge. They had it as an opera house. And what was interesting about the opera house and its history was this wasn't just the place that you went to hear the fat lady sing. They had different types of entertainment back, during the early 20th century. So, they had like certain concerts, they had magic shows, they had comedians, and obviously that attracted, a lot of people to come down to it. So both these places kind of have a similar appearance, especially the indoor part of it, like in the upstairs region that almost resembles like a giant attic. But the spirit responses, the responses from these spirits in both these buildings were different, because you got, like I said, the one in Brookston were very strict and not happy that we had female investigators with us. But in the other place, they were open-minded. They probably still didn't like when we had female investigators in certain areas where they practiced their rituals, but they did give other types of responses when they were investigating what was part of the opera house at that time.
Have you ever been attacked?
Yes, I have. And I actually just had a recent attack. What's funny is, understandably, the others won't talk about it, but because since this is my case, as bad as it was, I'm still willing enough to talk about it. That was when we went to the Holy Cross Abbey in Canyon City, Colorado, a few months ago. And what I saw, it wasn't only what I was attacked by, it was also what I saw too. What I saw that night, I mean, I could still draw a sketch of it if I wanted to. I don't think I'll ever forget what it was. But it was really not long after we started the investigation. We were in the chapel of the Abbey, and all of a sudden I start feeling this like really hot stabbing pain in my stomach. Now, again, at first I thought, maybe it was something that I ate, because I did eat dinner not long before that. But this just felt so much different, and I had to call because I was with Jeremy. I know was in another part of the building. I was with Adrian. I was with Jan, and a few other investigators. Some of whom, a lot of these others, I was being introduced to for the first time. Scott Smith, not Wilson. He was with us too, along with Tammy. And at one point, I couldn't take the pain anymore, and I told Jan, who happened to me next, who's saying, Jan, I don't know what's going on, but I am not feeling good. Like, it wasn't like a vomiting sensation. It was just like something. The best way I could really describe it was, it almost felt like as if something just grabbed your stomach and then just twisted it, as hard as they possibly could. So they had to take me out. And after a few minutes, I was fine. And I even ended up going back in the chapel. I went up to the choir area with Jan and Scott. Everything was fine at that point. Although at one point when I turned, very briefly, I thought I saw a floating mist, which was kind of more out of the corner of my eye area. But, I didn't really think too much of it after this whole painful situation. But when I went back downstairs and sat back in the chapel, that pain started coming back. I'm thinking, okay, something's not right. Like, and this time it actually felt like something was grabbing me. And I told Jan, again, because I realized I was being attacked. So she basically just embraced me and gave me this healing energy and almost like a protective circle to make sure whatever it was cannot attack me. And it was so bad that they actually had to bring a guy, one of the owners in. He put holy water like all over me for additional protection. But about an hour after the attack, that's when whatever this thing was that attacked me decided to show itself. maybe not an hour. I'd probably say about 20 minutes, half hour later. We went up to the third, or we were up on the third or fourth floor. And also, I wasn't the only one who saw this. Jan saw this too. Adrienne, on the other hand, she felt that energy, and she had to basically kind of walk away. I don't blame her for leaving us to deal with it, because I knew what she was feeling. So I completely understood her position. So because I didn't want her to be put in danger either. As we're looking, something told me to look down the hallway, and we're looking. This is one of those giant hallways. I mean, we're looking probably about a good, whatever it was, looked like it was probably about a good 50 or 60 feet. That's quite a distance away. But no, like when you see something, like from afar, it looks smaller, and if it's like closer to you, it's larger. It didn't change the size. Like I said, 50, 60 feet, that's quite a distance away. But what I saw was, I saw this huge, dark, humanoid-shaped creature standing at the end of the hallway. Like I said, the figure looked humanoid, but it was clearly not a human being. It had to have been well over 8.5, 9 feet tall. I mean, this thing was huge, and its body was incredibly emaciated, almost like it hadn't eaten in some time. Just these very long arms, very long legs that were long and spindly like that of a spider's. Its head, I mean, it was completely black, so no facial features or anything, but I could see the head was kind of oval shaped, so it obviously told me its head was completely bald. But the one thing that really disturbed me the most was its long fingers. It had these huge, basically like talons, and even though I couldn't see its face, I could tell this thing was watching me. It just stood there, it looked at me, and then it turned its head over to Jan, and then it looked back at me, and before I knew it, all of a sudden, this thing, it disappeared. It was gone. And I don't know if I'd rather say that I was actually scared of what I saw, but I was absolutely in shock that, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And what I believe what I have seen today, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this, is a creature that is known as the I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the rake before.
Yes.
I honestly believe that's what I saw that night, because it fit the exact same descriptions. And when I got back to the safe house, some of the other investigators were not familiar with the rake story, which I told them it is true. It started off as a creepypasta story. And I played the creepypasta audiobook, just so they can get an idea. And I told them, this is the fictional part of it, but people said they actually had seen and encountered this creature. And what I think the worst part of this whole entire encounter was that I started having these, I guess you can call them like reenactment dreams, like as if I was kind of rewatching what happened, but like from a separate view. And I even had one of those dreams while I was asleep that night. But I recall it was like a repeat of what happened in the chapel. It was when I started feeling that stomach pain, but this time from seeing from a different view, like a separate view, I could see that same huge creature this time walking over, kneeling down and using its long claws and grabbing my stomach. That's where the pain was coming from. It still looked the same as I remember in these dreams, but there was one additional feature compared to what I saw in reality, and I'll never forget this. It had these huge glowing red eyes, and even though it was dark in this chapel and it didn't have any other features, when it started grabbing my stomach, I could actually see this thing, its face move, almost like it was grinning, like it was taking pleasure in my torment. But then when Jan came along to protect me, this thing just jumped up and fled back into the darkness of the Abbey. This thing was nothing like what I saw that night. Was definitely something I've never seen before, and certainly something I don't think I'll ever forget.
It's yeah. He he kind of like, it's his, this is my domain. Don't cross it. Don't come near it. I will protect it. I will protect what's in it. But even though he's going to haunt anybody who goes near him, right?
I honestly believe it. I even said at one point, because we had to do like a blessing at one point. We did something. We did kind of like a cleansing. One thing I know for a fact was, even when I was still asking myself, the hell is this thing? I mean, that was literally my first words when I saw this thing, was, even though I should have already known based on the appearance, literally I was like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah.
But the other thing that was going through my mind was, because this thing was going to try to attach to us, we just kind of told ourselves, we can't let it leave the building. Like, we can't let this thing, it was trying to escape. We were trying to do our best to contain it, and we were fortunate enough to do so.
Yeah. But, you know, they don't care who you are. They don't care what you do. They have no preference, and they'll just go after whoever they feel like. If you're a target, you're going to be a target, and that's it.
Exactly.
And yeah. And it has an after effect too. It will, you know, and it will stick to you, as you know. It just, yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, I mean, you never forget it. You never do.
No.
Yeah, it was definitely, as Josh just said, it was dark and malevolent. I mean, this thing, I've encountered a cryptid. I mean, I know the rake is more considered a cryptid. Now, I have had an experience with a previous cryptid before, and that I wouldn't necessarily say a full-on encounter, but if you want to call it a true encounter, so be it. The only thing that's ever come close to something like that was I may have had a possible encounter with the Mothman, because I've also a big fan of the cryptids too. But if I can compare it to the possible Mothman encounter that I had and this creature, the rake was definitely something that was definitely 100 times more intense. If not, if I could say it in a bad way, if not worse.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the Mothman has been seen in South America recently.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's
there's been reports of people reporting of. I mean, whatever the creature is, it looks exactly like the Mothman. So it's like it's either the Mothman was traveling, or it's the same, I guess, species. I'm not even sure what you would want to call it.
I honestly believe there's more, despite its name.
Definitely there's more.
Yeah, I was going to say, I honestly believe there's a full species of it. There's members of it. There's not just one entity.
Yeah.
Because
there's probably also different kinds, because you're talking about the rake, and I was mentioning in a show before, here in Japan, I've seen a version of the rake, but it's pure white.
Yeah, normally it's pale white in color, as I remember, but for whatever reason, this time was black.
I've seen a lot of them black in America, but the one here that I've seen was pure white. And I felt it staring at me before I saw it, because I just felt so uneasy. Like, you know what I mean? That feeling that someone's watching you and you feel so uncomfortable by it.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling I got. And I looked over and this thing was staring at me. And I always tell people, I also think I heard it a night or two before that, when I was trying to walk my dog later at night, because I'd hear something following me. It stayed about the same distance going through the trees around people's properties. It stayed around the same distance, but go back and forth between trying to sound like a sick cat, then it tried to sound like a sick dog, be quiet for a little bit, and then sick cat, sick dog. It couldn't decide which one it wanted to be. But the weird thing is, you could tell it's trying to mimic that sound, but it sounded off. You could tell that's not it wasn't the real animal.
Surprisingly, with my encounter with what happened at the Abbey, there wasn't any sound, as I remember. I mean, this thing was absolutely silent, even if it was moving its head, even if it was moving its head and, could have made some possible noise, I didn't hear anything. It was just completely silent. So whether or not this thing was actually black in color or was just, hiding itself, it was really hard to tell, but it sounds almost identical. But just the way how it even looked black in color, it wasn't like your typical shadow person like you would see. Yeah. To me, it just felt like, I've heard this from a story, but I'll use this basically the exact same way. It was like it had pulled the darkness of the night and wore it like a skin. That's how dark this thing was. I mean, if you didn't have any flashlights with you, you probably wouldn't even know this thing was in the dark with you. So, but as far as like with the Mothman, though, like you said, though, that's kind of new that I heard that it's now being sighted down in South America, because what's kind of funny is that a few years ago, and I think it might still be going on, we had a number of Mothman sightings here in Chicago. I mean, there was so many of them that I've been trying to keep up with all of them because I write a lot of them down. But over here they call it either the Chicago Mothman or the Chicago Phantom. And when you mentioned about like that, there's probably more than one entity.
Who no one knows.
Well, there was one encounter where one witness, this was one of the reports I was able to keep up with, and I have in the records, this was also one of the few times that this occurred during the day too. This was in broad daylight. This witness said she saw two Mothmen flying around, and the way how they were kind of flying, it was odd. It was like they were kind of flying at each other, then flying away, and then flying back. What she was assuming was very likely it was probably a male and female that I guess you could say trying to figure out some way to mate or something, like, I don't know if it was some kind of mating call or something like that, but it sounded like to me that it was a very likely a male and female Mothman.
That'd be interesting. And you wonder if they have families or if they have children or is it just the male and female,
I think very much like, this is just my personal opinion, but much like Bigfoot, I believe
that's
that
what I was going to say. Bigfoot.
Yeah,
believed to have families.
Yeah, I was going to say I believe the same would probably go to Mothman, that there are family groups, because, and like you said, Irene, if there's like possible like children of these creatures, because you also have to remember, although the majority of Mothman sightings, like you see in Point Pleasant back in the 60s, that the typical description, especially height, was always 7 to 8 feet tall. But there were other cases where people said they saw it and that it was smaller than what was originally said. So it's very likely that, these are probably either babies or children of them. So I think it's no different.
Yeah.
Well, and it's even believed too, because there's actually a similar cryptid out there. Again, I'm sure you guys know this one, called the Owlman of Cornwall, England, and very similar description. And they even said if it's possible that both the Mothman and the Owlman are the same type of creature, because they have almost the exact same description.
Now, I know you're into scary movies, and this goes back to some of the people not being as respectful in the paranormal community, but Jeepers Creepers.
Jeepers Creepers.
So, what a lot of people don't know about me is I grew up in the area where the Jeepers Creepers event happened that inspired the movie.
Oh, okay.
And I still know people who live near that building. Some people say I live down the street. Other of my friends say I can see it from my house. And what's sad is, this is also the 28th year. This is how it came up this year on Facebook, as you're talking about it, is this is technically the 28th year for it. So there's some people superstitious around that area. But people were saying that the Jeepers Creepers building is actually a barn owned by the Amish.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they use it as a hog barn, but unfortunately, because of people visiting it for it being famous for what it is, they had to board it up and close it down so they can't use it anymore. And unfortunately, now it's filled with graffiti. So yeah, it's sad that they can't even use their own barn because people just kept going over there to, I don't know what they were doing, but caused the Amish to have to board the whole entire thing up, and now it's nothing but graffiti.
That's really sad when you have like a particular movie location. Like I understand if it was like a huge location, like let's say like Mansfield Reformatory, location of where Shawshank Redemption was filmed. Place
Mm-hmm.
like that is understandable because that building is huge and it was already a historical monument even before that movie was filmed. Like I can understand that. But a simple barn, that's still being primarily used in this case by the Amish and now all of a sudden becoming a movie site, it's definitely going to give a lot of that unwanted attention. And it's just really sad that, they have to make these changes. The closest thing we have to our area like that, and this is another famous place in Chicago, not haunted, but this is going to sound hard to believe, I'm only about 20 minutes away from the town of Winnetka, which is where the Home Alone house is located. But, what they have done at the very least, I mean, to this day, they still get, visitors that want to see the house. You can't go inside it, of course, because it is still a residential house. But obviously, I don't think they're getting very many visitors at this time during the month of April, but they definitely do get a lot of visitors as we approach Christmas. But what they have done at the very least, the people that live there, is they have kept a fence and they have like multiple security cameras, to keep an eye to make sure no one is stupid enough to actually try to break into the house. But, it's nice to see that some people have figured out ways to try to keep these crowds at bay. But oh man, there's just so many other locations, like you said. The barn.
I heard the house that they used in the filming of Hocus Pocus is like that, where the owners actually had to put up also signs that says absolutely no photos because it came to the point where it was ridiculous, or absolutely, I think it said like absolutely do not come to the door because people are just bothering them all the time, knocking on the door, and they're like, no, don't come in. We don't want you taking photos of us in our house. We don't want to give you a tour.
Exactly. There was only one time I did remember hearing on this was from a news article, was again, if you look at something like the Home Alone house, there was only one time that they did open it up to the public, but they were only allowed to go to the front floor because, contrary to popular belief, that movie, the inside of that mansion, that's not actually what it fully looked like in the actual house. The main floor is exactly what it was. That's basically what they probably wanted the people to see. But upstairs in the rest of the mansion was completely different. The rest of it was either shot in a different house or it was shot in a studio. And another house I could think of, which this is one that we're all too familiar with, I don't think they get as many visitors like they used to. And it's probably the most notorious example. And that's undoubtedly the Amityville Horror House.
Yeah.
I was going to bring that up because people are saying the same thing, is unfortunately the owners had to put something up also because people are just bothering them, trying to knock on the door at all hours of the day. It got overwhelming. And they're just like, we're just trying to live our life in our house.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, I mean, I did in fact, one of the first episodes I did for my show, The Nick Files, was Amityville, which to this day, I still consider that one of my best episodes. Because I did like 3 parts of it. And I found a rare news clip of after when the movie came out, or well, not just that movie, the sequels that came out throughout the early to late 80s. And this clip showed all these curiosity seekers parked outside the house, and they're just sitting there, just looking. They're not even taking pictures of the house. They're just standing there looking at it. And although I'm sure the family that was living there at that point were very reluctant to talk to the media, at this point, I think they knew that they had to talk to them because they wanted to get that word out that they didn't want to be bothered. Obviously, they talking to the media is not always the best, but they knew this is probably our only other way of trying to get people to get off our property. But of course, that still didn't deter people to stop. Numerous arrests were being made around that house.
I heard that the owners had to be calling the cops on the groups of people because they're just like, we're just having people sit there and watch our house, and it's so unnerving when you're trying to live your life and you look out there and you have people staring at your windows. So it's like, we can't really have the windows open, we can't have the blinds open because people are just sitting there watching.
Exactly. And see, and that's something that even as an investigator myself, although I'm a huge fan of the Amityville horror case, because it was my very first haunted house case I ever studied again at a young age. Even still, I wouldn't even do that myself, because that to me is just a disrespectful thing. And that's what led eventually, because to get those classic eye windows taken out of the house and replace them with normal ones to deter all these tourists.
It's still not helping the way they wanted it to.
Yeah.
I would say probably the crowds have lowered. Like it certainly is not as huge because those eye windows are gone. But the crowd, but they still have those crowding issues to this day.
There's a place here in Japan. It's on the western side. It's called a place called Sagamihara Hospital, and it was the most notorious haunted hospital. And they had young people going in there, spray painting everything and messing about, and they had to tear down the hospital.
Oh, geez, that's really a shame.
But it was one of the best haunted places in that hospital. It was old. Yeah, and back in the day, you were able to go in the hospital and do an investigation if you wanted to. But it no longer exists anymore because it was just wrecked, like, to the core. They just wrecked everything inside. They spray painted the walls. They tore a lot of places down. They wrecked the ceilings. They wrecked the walls, and they just trashed the whole place. And it wasn't a very big hospital, but it was like, yeah, a lot of things happen in hospitals, right? And people do die.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it was nothing. It was a regular hospital, and they had regular surgical wards and outpatient and everything else in there. But it's no longer there anymore. And it was even on the TV program about that hospital. It was really big. And then, yeah, it was really big in the 90s. And then afterwards, they just had to tear it down.
It's really unfortunate when they have to make that decision just to keep these trespassers off, because I've always tried to do the right thing of like telling, especially a lot of these newbie investigators out there, like those who are just getting started into it, and saying, just first of all, go in with the respect, but most importantly, do not be trespassing on these places. And because there was actually one time, I can give you an example of somebody that tried to encourage me to do that, and I flat out said that was not going to happen. Actually, two incidents. The first time was, and this guy that wanted to do this was somebody who used to be a friend of mine. This isn't someone within our paranormal community. You wouldn't know who this guy is, but this guy used to be a friend of mine, and he told me that he found some kind of abandoned house in a town called Niles, which is just about 10 minutes away from me, and he wanted to go check it out. And of course, my first question is saying, well, do you know the owner? Have you spoken to the owner if we're allowed to go in? He's like, oh, no, I just go right inside. I was like, it's trespassing, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed like it didn't really care too much. Even the next, but he's like, well, the place is like boarded up. It's like, well, then how the hell did you even get into this house in the first place? He said that supposedly, again, not surprising, for some of these places, which I'm sure either he did it himself or somebody before him did, said he found a loose plank in one of the windows. You can go in. And I also told him, too, do you also realize that in this day and age, a lot of those abandoned locations, they usually have security cameras in those places. Everybody, there's a popular misconception that when it comes to places that are abandoned and are no longer used and nobody owns it, that's not entirely true. I mean, and I know it's not just here in the United States. I mean, I think it's like a lot more countries are starting to do it. But
Mhm.
if nobody actually owns it, then it belongs to the state then. So somebody does own it, whether
Mm.
you know it or
Oh,
not.
that state is prosecuting if you're caught.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the craziest thing. This house, which I did look up, it was actually right next to the Niles Police Department. So I
No,
was like,
no.
I was like, there is no way,
Oh shit.
unless you actually speak to the police or the state, there is no way that I am breaking into this place next to the police station to get ourselves arrested. And when I also said too about the security cameras, I couldn't believe what he said next. Thing he says to me that, well, oh yeah, I found it and I knocked it down and broke it. He literally confessed that he committed destruction of property, and I was like, yeah, that's not me investigating this place. That is not going to happen. Not in a million years.
Yeah.
Like unless I get permission to go, absolutely not. And it's Josh, it's very disrespectful. I mean, this guy, I really wanted to ask him, saying, "What the hell were you thinking?"
Yeah.
And then the other time that somebody tried to encourage me to do trespassing, and this was on a live Facebook video, was there's a cemetery that's in a called White Cemetery in Barrington, and right off Barrington is a road called Cuba Road. Now, as we all know, like when it comes to haunted roads, it's not illegal to go through a road that's said to be haunted, as long as you're not hanging out there for very long.
Mm-hmm.
Cuba Road, it's one of those classic haunted roads where it's been notorious for decades. A lot of supposed paranormal activity has occurred there, and it's like a 2-mile stretch of road. The way how we did it was we would go down the road one way, and then we turn the car around and go back the opposite direction. And after that, we'd leave. Because, like I said, we didn't want to be there for too long. But technically, what we were doing was not illegal because it was a public road.
Yeah.
There were times that we sometimes did stop by the cemetery after dark, but we never got out of the car and walked in because, again, that would have been trespassing. There were security cameras there. So, again, technically, what we were doing was not trespassing. But this other friend of mine who she's had a lot of issues before this, she always respected the rules. We did it before the right way. But then this night, she said she wanted to go in the cemetery. I was like, we can't go in. It's nighttime. It's closed. The gates were open, but that still doesn't, just because the gates are open does not mean that you could just walk right in, because again, they had security lights.
Yeah.
And she started getting really irritated by it. I'm like, there is no way I'm going in. And there were investigators who were watching this video live, and they later told me that night, like the next day, when they were watching live, and they were like, there's no way Nick's going to do that. He's not going to break into this place. He's not going to do it. And they were absolutely right. But what was crazy was when this person got really upset that we didn't want to go in. I mean, she just had this attitude, really started complaining, and also then confessed that she said she's broken into other places like that before, in spite of me telling her, completely unaware at the time, that this was all being shot live on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I was like, you just made a confession, and but we never went in. So there was no doubt in my mind that, regardless if this was like a movie spot or a legend spot or a haunted location, I have no doubt in my mind that we would have been arrested for trespassing that night.
Oh,
I was successful in preventing that from happening.
Yeah. I mean, another thing is that because she got upset because she wanted to go, it's like they're almost calling her to go in there, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like you wouldn't say a possession, but it acts like one, right? It acts like a possession where you get really pissed off and I have to go,
Josh.
And you have to break that. You have to break it, because the way that they're doing it is like a sinister way of calling a person to go in there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not a good feeling, actually.
It's not a good feeling. It's not, because like I said, when I started hearing her say that kind of stuff, it was like, and especially again, since I knew that there were investigators watching through this live video that I had, I mean, they knew. I think they knew that I was going to side with them, and I was going to make the right choice, saying we're not going unless we get that permission.
Exactly.
There is a school. There's an old boarding school in the Carolinas that it's the same way, where it's very popular for people to break into. But right next door is the police department, and I'm just like, this is why a lot of people get caught, because not only are they patrolling it, but obviously they're going by. So that's why a lot of people getting caught is they're going either to or from the police department. They look over and they see people climbing through the fence, and I'm just like, why would you risk breaking in to a place literally right across the street from the police department? All I had to do is look over and see you.
Yeah.
I mean, I will admit, Josh did say, like, saying we've all been there, but he draws a line. I think we've all kind of had that issue, though. Like, sometimes we did make the mistake of trespass, like we weren't intentionally doing it. And I felt like there's only ever been one time that I ever did something like that, but there was kind of a difference, though. We were at this was out in an abandoned mental health center in Indiana, in Rockville. It was where the Park Mental Health Center was located. And again, this was years ago. I had it filmed on Facebook, but again, we didn't think it was going to get a lot of real attention because it was during an event that was going on in Rockville. Indiana is known for having a lot of covered bridges. It's not the state that has the most covered bridges, but the town of Park County has the most covered bridges, like 31 covered bridges, one of which is said to be haunted. And it's in fact called the the covered bridge capital of the world. And they have this festival where they honor all these bridges that are still around today, those that are gone. And we found this abandoned, like I said, mental health center. And my dad and I decided, saying, let's go check it out. And I was like, and I even said, well, don't we have to worry about trespassing or anything? I know probably wasn't, again, best choice, but truth be told, I don't think we were really going to have to really worry about, police or anything, because they were obviously more focused on the festival in the downtown area. And we just thought, we'll just be here for a few minutes and, we'll just go right out. There's nothing wrong if you're just there for like a quick minute, like if you want to take some, because it's hence the name urban exploration.
Yeah.
So
some people do take photos outside. Yeah. The police will watch, and the police will be like, we're just watching to make sure you don't go in. But there's no, I mean, as long as you're not actually on the physical property and you're outside taking photos of it, I mean, it's not illegal to do that. But once you step on property, that's when they're like, yes, I can finally get you. But also, one thing people don't realize when they do that is if you go to those locations you're not supposed to be at, you take a video of you in it.
Yeah.
That location can use that to prosecute, get you charged for trespassing. That's all it takes. Even if you're like, oh, I wasn't caught then. That video evidence is enough for the police to be like, yeah, okay, this was reported, and you can't say it wasn't you when you're showing yourself in a video. Like, here I am in this location.
Yeah, it wasn't probably the best choice, but of course my dad wanted to check it out, so I was just following. But here the interesting part is that while we were checking the building out, another car pulls up, and we first thought, okay, we'll just tell the officer that we're going to leave. We're not trying to cause problems or anything. We're just exploring it. But it wasn't a police officer. I'll never forget her. There was like the strangest woman that I think we ever met. She walked into the building like while we were kind of checking it out, and she'd just be, you could hear it in the video. She's making these weird like noises and stuff like that. I'm just ignoring, just filming, saying, yeah, like she's making these noises, saying, yeah, so check this out. Look at this room that we found right here. I'm saying this seems kind of, and she'd be following me. I think we were kind of at that point more concerned about this woman that we were with than the police. But what's funny is that building now they are allowing investigations, because the craziest part, the twist on this place, we went before they started doing investigations. It is what I believe is Indiana State Sanatorium.
Oh,
yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
There's places here that I want to go to, but I'd have to take my husband because we'd have to do some convincing at the police department to go there.
Right.
The places that my husband knows as a child growing up, they call it urban legends, but he knows hundreds of places that's really freaky haunted. Like he'll take you there. He said, "Okay, we can go. Let's take a plane. We'll go there. It's cheaper to take a plane than taking a bullet train." But he'll say, "Okay, let's go there," and yeah, he'll do that. And he said, "Hey, no problem. Hey, I know all these places. I know this place. I know that place." As a child growing up, yeah, it's the most popular place. And he said, "Yeah, I'll take you there." And I said, "Okay, but we need a permission by the police department before going there." Yeah, I guess so. Like you think.
See,
You
on a
need
different.
permission from the police for anywhere you enter here in Japan. It's from what I've been told, it's not easy to always get the permission because police don't want to be checking up on you to make sure nothing happened to you. Because it's like if
Right.
something happens to you, then
Yeah, it's on them because you're being a pain in the ass, and they don't like anybody who's going to be a pain in the ass to cause trouble for them because they're responsible for you, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Although there was one time, probably one of the best examples where we got good permission was, see, again, here in Chicago, we also have, again, one of the most notorious haunted cemeteries, again, in the country, if not the world, and that's Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, which one of these days I need to make a visit there. It's been a couple of years since I've been there. But being so notorious, again, it's one of those places that it's not a problem if you go during the day, but at night it is heavily patrolled. Like, even though it's in a wooded area, it's very well guarded. And contrary to popular belief, it's not just the cemetery that's said to be haunted, it's the nearby woods surrounding the cemetery. I mean, it's a huge area. Tom McNicholas is watching. I've been with him several times there, but about almost 10 years ago, we're trying to get this back up, but we used to have a paranormal con of our own here in Chicago called the Chicago Ghost Conference. And if you guys are ever looking, if you guys ever wanted to visit and look for a big conference, the Chicago Ghost Conference is definitely one of them. I recommend. But we were going to have a special event during the con for 2 nights only, where we got a permit and we were legally allowed to go to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery after dark. The catch is that, again, it was only 2 nights only, but also we were only allowed to stay for I think it was either an hour and a half or 2 hours. So there was only a limit. Now, to get that kind of permit, you would expect you'd have a huge crowd because this was almost every investigator's dream of wanting to go to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery after dark legally without, having the worry of getting arrested. Well, we told the investigator the first night, oh my God, we had a lot of, there was probably well over 100 people with us that night. So it was huge, but we did tell these people, with the permit that we had was, it did allow us to go after dark for these, an hour and a half, 2 hours, but it also did not hold anybody reliable, for, if there was an accident. So, like if somebody, fell and hit their head, say, well, we're sorry to tell you, but that's your fault then. You can't blame that on us. You can't blame that on
I've seen a lot of waivers investigating places that says that, where if something happens, that's on you.
It's on you. So you can't
we're not liable.
Yeah, you can't blame. We also told them you couldn't blame the Park Service or the police department. And fortunately, most, if not all, these investigators agreed. They said, sure, if that happens to us, no big deal. We went out to the cemetery that night, though we had to take a different direction because the main entrance was you had to go across the street, and we didn't want to alert all these other cars that were passing by that this was going on. It was almost like a top secret type of event. So we did the investigation, which going after dark is definitely a different world compared to what it is during the day. But the second night that we were there, we didn't have as many people. This time we only probably had less than half of the people we had the night prior. I think only 30 or 40 people came out this time. And what was kind of funny about that investigation was not only were we catching some evidence, but this whole thing about being liable. When we were done with the investigation, and we did have an officer that did check in, just to make sure that everybody was okay. But when we were done and we had to go back into the wood, because we had to go back into the woods to where we originally entered, my dad, who was kind of leading the whole thing, he, along with another investigator who was leading this too, somehow got ahead of us. And the next thing we knew, our group, we were like lost in the middle of the woods, nighttime woods, and we didn't know where to go. The funniest thing is, it wasn't long till they found out that I was the son of the guy who was leading this whole thing. So next thing you know, they're all turning to me and they're like, "Hey, is there any way you can call your dad to figure out, try to get us out of here?" So they weren't like hysterical, thankfully, like you see in movies, like with a survivor situation. So I called my dad up, and I don't know what happened, how that they got ahead of us so fast, but we were stuck in those woods for like 20 minutes before we started seeing flashlights come through the woods, and they were able to pull the rest of us back out into the main area. So, but
you
we
can
were
laugh
definitely
about
not
it now,
going to be held
I bet
liable
you did
about
laugh
that.
about it then,
Yeah, well, I was kind of in disbelief. I mean, I was actually kind of laughing a few times because I thought this was kind of funny, but then, after a minute or two, I realized, okay, this is serious. Like,
Yeah.
because now it was like, now I had all this weight on my shoulders. Like, my dad's not here. They're gonna find out I'm his son, so I better start taking care of business.
Good luck to that one, right? Yeah.
I had to take charge. I didn't have any choice. And Robert just said on the other side, Camp Crystal Lake feeling there.
Crystal Lake is actually based off of a story that happened in Montana, because I lived an hour and a half from where something did happen that inspired the movie, where a kid did drown in the Camp Lake. And I guess the mother went crazy. So obviously Hollywood turned that into
Friday the 13th. Yeah.
Friday the 13th. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I never knew that.
Because in that area, I know a lot of people who'd go there to camp and stuff, and people would just be like, there's a superstition there where you always have to sleep with one eye open when you visit.
That's interesting. I never heard of it. I heard of another story involving camp murders, but I think it was down in Kentucky, if I'm correct. Emily Menthouse, I'm sure you guys know her. She told us a story about it months ago, that supposedly whatever these, again, it's been a while since I've looked into them, whatever these murders were that I think occurred in the early 70s, were also among the inspirations for the Friday the 13th movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't get that number 13, because 13 here is a good number.
I was going to say, I know it's different in Japan.
Superstition in the United States of 13 is the bad luck number. I'm not quite sure why either, but I also know like a lot of hotel rooms won't have a 13th room. They won't have a 13th floor. It goes from 12 to 14 just because they're trying to avoid number 13.
Yeah,
that's right. You're absolutely correct on that. I was going to say that the even though that there is, you can't truly remove the 13th floor, they just put a 14 in it instead.
Yeah, it's just go to 12 to 14, and you're just like, wait, where's 13? It's like, it's technically floor 14, but the hotel, because of superstition, people won't put it on there. It's probably, I'm assuming it's because probably people who are superstitious won't stay on the floor 13. I personally don't care. But, I can see a lot of other people are just like, I don't want to be in room 13. I don't want to be in a 13th floor. So they just go from 12 to 14. So, you're 13th floor, you're mentally not thinking 13.
Like they don't have a fourth floor.
Yeah. There's even a phobia of the number 13, which it's like one of the longest words out there, which is, if I hope I'm saying it correctly because I just put it up, triskaidekaphobia. It's fear of the number 13. And
they wouldn't like me because my son was born on the Friday the 13th.
Oh, wow. Check that out. That's awesome.
right? Yeah. And you know what? He's freaky. He's a freaky empath. I mean, he's a clairvoyant too, but yeah.
You're right, by the way. I looked it up. You said about the number 4. Yeah, the Asian countries like China,
Or
Taiwan,
she means
Singapore,
death. So
That's
you don't
Japan,
crazy.
have
Korea, and
fourth floor.
Vietnam, as well
What
as
was it
some.
about the 4, Irene? I think I heard something when we had to do a class here in Japan. There is something about the number 4. Is it the word? It also means something else, or is it just?
She means the number 4 in Japanese. She means death, to die.
That's what I remember hearing something about it where they're just like, because I remember them telling us here that you probably won't see a 4th floor just for.
No.
That's probably I think that's the reason. It also means death, and that's why they avoid 4.
And it's funny. Okay, cool.
Well, check this out. I found this picture. Sometimes the number 14 is even considered unlucky, and there's even a residential building. I found a picture of this where not only the 13th floor does not exist, but neither does the number 4 or 14. All 3 numbers have been removed from this building.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
In Shanghai.
Yeah. And when kids have entrance exams, okay, they have to worry about the numbers. They're given a long number, like I think what's a 6 or 8 digit number. And if you have the number 14 or you have the number 4 in it, you're not gonna get into that school. It's
that's a new thing.
You're gonna flunk. And it depends on the entrance exam number too, my son said. And if you have a really like a 44444 number, or you have a something like that, yeah, your chances of getting into that high school, or your chances of getting into the university or the junior high school, you're toast, right?
Right. That's interesting.
So yeah, I mean,
Josh is still on the 13th floor.
Well, that's what we're saying though, is people are superstitious because they don't see 13 whatever. They're not mentally thinking I'm on a 13th floor. Yes, technically you're on the 13th floor, but they're like mentally are telling themselves, like you said, they are pretending they're on a 14th floor.
Yeah.
Well, and that it's not just floors. I mean, that's even with hotel rooms. I mean, I don't know of any rooms that have actually done that, but the closest I can think of, again, another haunted location we have here in Chicago is we got the Congress Hotel. And the Congress Hotel, I mean, it has been used for different movies. Unfortunately, even though it is featured on the ghost tours, it's one of those fancy hotels, so you could obviously tell a lot of the staff members and especially security guards, they do not like it when they show up. Even though we are doing it legally, like as part of a tour, they don't want to be recognized as a haunted hotel. They want to be looked at as like a 5-star hotel. Yeah. But according to urban legend, there's a room, I don't remember which floor it is, but there is a room in the building where it's literally been walled off. You cannot go in for any reason. It's not because the unlucky number, any unlucky numbers. It's because they actually do admit that this room is so haunted that they're not letting anyone in. And I think you guys probably know the story, kind of sounding a little familiar. That whole room situation became the inspiration for Stephen King to write 1408.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's the real 1408 right there.
Oh, gosh.
I don't know if you're a fan of Japanese horror movies.
Oh, yes.
But all the Japanese horror movies, if you actually research them, is based off of an urban legend or a ghost story here in Japan, which is crazy.
That's correct.
Every one of them. Ring is it's based off of a story here.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a huge fan of the Japanese horror films. I mean, they are just so unbelievably terrifying. Irene, I know you've heard me say this before, but I think honestly, the only people that are making real true horror films are the Asian horror films, primarily the Japanese ones. And I saw Ringu, for example, the original Japanese version of the Ringu, in high school, along with The Grudge. There was one movie that I was planning on I was going to go see. I haven't seen it yet, but I have seen the trailer for it. And this is a story that's also very well known throughout Japan. I know they made a movie called and it's based off the legend of the slit mouth woman.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that movie I heard, although it's a ghost story, I heard it was known for its gruesome scenes, because to make matters worse, not only is it extremely graphic, they do this to children, obviously, something that's not very commonly seen in many Japanese or any horror films anywhere for the most part. So that's
mostly men. She'll say, "Do you think I'm pretty?"
Yep.
And if you don't say you're pretty, you're dead.
She slices your face up the same way.
The correct response, they said, is you either say, "I don't know," or "I don't have an opinion." That's your only safe options.
Yeah.
Well, they also say too that if you say that you're with somebody, like, a girlfriend or something like that, I guess supposedly that's another way to avoid her. But if you try to run away, though, she'll just appear right in front of you. Like, it's just. But in the movie, though, I mean, they do follow the legend. But although she mainly goes after male victims, she's also one of those legends that supposedly she goes after kids too. And of course, just like any other country, when it comes to a certain legend, you got parents out there, who still, tell their kids, don't go out after dark, or the slit mouth woman will get you.
Yeah. And then men don't go out in the forest because of Yuki-onna. She's the one in the white kimono, and she'll say, come here, come here, come here, come here. And she's really beautiful, but then she'll turn around and she'll kill you if you're a man.
There is a lot of urban legends here that involve creatures turning into beautiful women just to lure men. So it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of the typical, not necessarily skinwalkers, but obviously more like the typical shapeshifters that I've heard. And it's not only just in Japan. One of the most recent ones that I had recently studied, it was actually, in fact, in China, is not necessarily like a shapeshifter, but more involving their version of a vampire called the Kangxi, and which is said to be like a hopping corpse, because it's basically, like, as they say, it's like a zombie practically. It just has this horrifying appearance, but they say in order to avoid the Kangxi is that the Kangxi is blind. It can only find you if it smells your breath. It takes out your chi. If I'm saying that correctly. But the other thing too, and some people, I actually remember speaking about this to someone. Someone basically was like, "Well, the best thing you got to do then is just do the usual way, put a stake in its heart." I was like, "No, that's not the case." I said to them, "You have to remember, this is a Chinese vampire. A wooden stake will not harm it. So you have to have it defeated in a different way. And one of those ways is you actually use it sounds crazy, but you actually have to use a mirror against the Kangxi, because apparently Kangxis are terrified of their own image. So not necessarily won't defeat them, but it will scare them off."
Yeah. It's funny because in our country, if you're pregnant, you have to carry a mirror. If you go to a funeral, when you're pregnant, you have to carry a mirror. It's just a thing that we have to do here in this country. A mirror is the only thing that'll keep you safe.
It's almost like it's still like carrying that belief that, mirrors act as a gateway.
Yeah. But in a home, you cannot have a mirror. Like in the living room, it's a no-no.
Wow.
Yeah. The only time where I have a mirror is in front of the sink.
Right.
Near
right.
the toilet, where you wash your hands. That's the only place where you're allowed to have a mirror. Or in the bathtub. I mean, other than that, it's a no-no.
Now that you... Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Irene.
They call it portals, right?
Right. Well, now that you're saying that, I mean, now kind of memorizing from a lot of the Japanese horror films that, you guys mentioned. I mean, well, and I also mentioned, I'm actually kind of starting to remember, like, there's not very many mirrors that are seen through, and that's what I find. It now makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Why there's not very many mirrors.
In my house too, you don't see a mirror in my living room, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, they don't want that. They don't want a mirror in your living room, and it's really not a place to put it. They'll have one in the entrance, the bathroom, the bathtub. That's it. And it just goes along with urban legends and strictness.
Right. I think one of the best ones that, I mean, again, this picture just came into my head. I just remembered, in fact, again, I just remembered one house in particular from one of the movies was The Grudge. I just exactly remembered that the only room they had in that movie was, I mean, for a mirror, was the bathroom, and that was it. There was nothing else. And I still remember 20 years later, first time seeing The Grudge. It was the American version of it. I gotta be honest, even though this was the American version, it still scared the hell out of me. I mean, I actually had to walk out of the theater.
It's frightening as heck, And I'm gonna tell you, where women do their makeup, they have a beauty stand, but they have a cover that covers the mirror. So when you're finished with your makeup, you cover the mirror so the mirror doesn't open. The mirror's not opened, and you can't. It can't. Nothing can come out and haunt you.
I thought I saw something like that also in The Grudge too, where they opened the mirror up and then they left it open for too long and then they close it. Actually, Josh, because he said he needs to see both versions. Here's a little trivia fact about the American version of it. It's still considered kind of a Japanese version itself, because the American version of The Grudge was basically the first horror film of any kind that was directed by the same director who did the Japanese version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I prefer the Japanese versions of horror movies over the American versions.
Normally, I would too. The Grudge, in my opinion, is one of the rare exceptions because, again, since it was done by the same director, that obviously means that he did his job well for both versions. But at that time, though, we didn't have many websites to really watch or purchase these movies online. So I had to see the American version before I could see the Japanese version.
Yeah. The thing is that, these movies, and there are based upon the true places, but there are places here that schools are still haunted.
Oh, I believe it. I definitely do.
My son's school's haunted. Junior high that my kids went to is haunted, right? Yeah. And and if you don't see it, they're not really gonna talk about it, right?
Right, exactly.
And I know it's haunted. My son knows it's haunted. Yeah, the teachers run out really quickly. After 5 o'clock, you'll never find a teacher at that school anyways. Yeah. And they'll when they find out what my son told them, they said, yeah, you'll never find a teacher after 6 o'clock at night there. It's just something that, yeah. And after what my son told him, well, yeah, forget about that one. His teacher, you'll never find him there anymore.
Right.
In the school that my son goes to now is haunted, and yeah. I mean, I'd like to go back there and see what I can find, but I don't. My son said, "No way." It'll probably freak him out because he could see him. I know who she is. I know she's 14 years old. I know she was killed by her mother. I know that. And she still haunts the gymnasium even to this day. And my son said, no, I'm not going to go back. I go, okay, you still got to go to school. You still got to graduate.
Yeah, you still got to go to school, obviously.
They do remote control now. They you're told to, all parents buy an iPad, and you do the homework on the iPad when you're at home, and you just email the homework to the teacher, and that's how they do it now. So it's easier. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to go back and I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it. It's just right in the middle of Tokyo, and a lot of places there in the middle of Tokyo are really freaky haunted from the old times, and it'll be interesting just to walk around and see what I can find.
Be very interesting, definitely. Josh also makes a good point. Just because the walls are gone doesn't mean it isn't sacred land.
Right.
Yeah. And the soil and whatever is tainted. Let's put it that way.
I mean, there's numerous places like that have that energy around, even when the building is gone. I mean, another place I could think I haven't been there yet is the former remnants where Summerwind Mansion once existed up in northern Wisconsin. There was I don't know if you guys remember the early seasons of the show A Haunting. They did an episode of Summerwind. And
yes.
Yeah, it was back in 1988 when the mansion was struck by lightning multiple times, and it resulted in the entire mansion burning down to the ground. All there's left today is just like the chimney, the foundation, and that's pretty much it. Although the mansion is gone, they're still saying that there's a lot of paranormal activity. Unfortunately, this is an area that you can't really investigate. It is it is still private property, even though it's a popular place to go to. And there are like YouTube videos where people do go because it's not heavily patrolled. And I will admit, I would love to investigate the remnants of Summerwind, but again, provided I get the permission to do so. But it's a fascinating location nonetheless, because it just, even with what's left, there's just a very eerie atmosphere. Because again, it's kind of like out in the middle of the woods, and you could still tell that again, the building may be gone now, but the activity that dwelled there still remains.
I'd like to go to Ishikawa Prefecture right after the tsunami along the beach.
Oh yeah,
it's no longer there. The houses are no longer there, but if you walk along there, I bet you'd find a lot of activity too. And most of the people who died were old people, right?
Right.
Who couldn't get out of their homes. I bet you we could find a lot. We just walk around there, and it's public property, right? I don't know if there's anything there anymore, but you can walk around along the beach, and just
those areas where they hit by tsunami. A lot of taxi drivers will say that they still pick up to this day a lot of ghost hitchhikers where they look like a solid person. They'll let them in a cab. They'll have a full conversation with the person. So when they're driving, they have an actual conversation with the person. But then when they get to the destination, they turn around and the person has completely vanished, but the seat will be wet where they were sitting. And a lot of people don't know this with the Japanese taxis, the passenger cannot open the door. So it's not like it's not like they open the door to jump out or anything. The driver has to open the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your classic example of vanishing hitchhikers. So, and we got one here in Chicago. We probably have the most notorious vanishing hitchhiker again from the world. We got Resurrection Mary here, and there are still people to this day that still have picked her up. And this has been going on since the 1930s. I mean, the difference, of course, is there are many different versions of whom Resurrection Mary was in life. We did uncover a few Marys that lived throughout the 1920s and 30s, and even found some photographs that kind of matched up the apparition. But what we don't know, unfortunately, however, if this is exactly her, but we found some possible identifications of what who Resurrection Mary may have been in life. Now, one similar thing about this one compared to the Japanese one is same exact scenario. Car drives down the road. You see a young girl, usually like in their late teens, 20s, or early 30s, long blonde hair. They pick her up. although they don't really have much of a conversation. Although one cab driver said that not only did she pick her up, they actually met at the former ballroom, which at that time was called the Old Henry Ballroom, what later became the Willowbrook Ballroom. And supposedly he danced with her, was going to take her home, and when she told him to stop near the cemetery, he claimed later that she actually kissed him on the cheek, which she said the kiss was just ice cold. Like, it just felt like as if someone put like a ice cube on his cheek, and then ran into the cemetery and disappeared. But on other occasions, same scenario too. They'll pick her up and she vanishes before they can even get a look at them. And but another famous one, and this is something you guys might have heard. You can find pictures of this on Google Image. Was in 1976, there was a cab driver that was passing by Resurrection Cemetery, and he saw a young woman standing behind the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, clinging on as if she was trying to like desperately get attention of wanting to get out. Of course, the driver, he immediately called the police because, he didn't know what to do. When the police got there, the woman was gone. They couldn't find any trace of her. But the weirdest thing was that the bars that supposedly she was holding her hands onto were like burnt and bent. And like I said, they took pictures of it, and they didn't really think too much of it at first. They took those bars and then they sent them out to a repair shop to get them straightened up and repaired. They put them back. A few days later, those burn marks came back. And so they did it again. No matter how many times they tried to get these bars repaired, it would end up the same way. Eventually, they just finally had enough and they couldn't deal with it anymore. So they replaced them with new bars. And as a result of that, there hasn't been anything like that since. But still, as of 2024, there are people out there who still claim that they see Resurrection Mary usually late at night on a rainy night, and they pick her up or they just see her by the side of the road. I've
heard of someone say a similar story to that cab driver, except it was a chilly night, so he lent her his coat. She was wearing it, and she, when she took off in the cemetery, he waited a couple minutes because he's like, I don't know what she's doing. Then finally he went to go check on her, and there's no sign of her, but in the middle of the cemetery was his jacket.
Oh, well, you know what? That actually brings up, did you guys know that not only that story, but also alongside Resurrection Mary, that these stories even inspired 2 songs that were written? You guys ever heard of this? You guys ever heard of the songs that were written about them?
I don't know.
Dickie Lee, or that country singer from the late 50s and 60s, he wrote a song, which you can find on YouTube. It's available, called Lori. Yeah, the name's different this time. It's called Lori, Strange Things Happen. And it sounds like, kind of a joyful song, but at the same time, it's kind of it's both a sense of creepiness because it's the same exact story where it's involving a young, probably teenager. It's a teenage tragedy song too. He meets Lori and they dance together. Lori reveals that it's also her birthday, but then she says that at one point that she needs to be driven back home. And as they're walking back to the car, Lori claims that she's feeling very cold, and he took his sweater. The storyteller takes his sweater off and wraps it around her. Then he takes her back. Then he takes her down the road and passes a nearby graveyard. But before as he's about to drive over, like to drop her off where supposedly she lives, he turns around and she's not there. He searches the car everywhere, can't find her. So again, classic version. He goes over to the house. A man answers, which turned out is the girl's father, saying, "Well, actually, no. Let me take that back. I messed up. He actually does drop her off, but then as he pulls out of the driveway, and he turns around to go home himself, he realized he forgot his sweater. So he drives back to the house, and that's when he knocks on the door, and a man answers. It turns out it's Lori's father. And she's like, "You're wrong, son. You weren't with my daughter. She passed away a year ago today, and today is her birthday." And doesn't know what to think. So he decides to drive out to the cemetery where supposedly she was buried. And as he's going through the cemetery, even though it's dark outside, one grave in particular catches his attention, walks over to it, finds Lori's grave, and lying across the grave is his sweater.
Oh, wow.
I've heard of that too. And they said the father even showed him the picture, and it was the same girl. That's what freaked him out, and that's why he went to that cemetery.
I would play the song if I wanted to, but of course, obviously, with copyright issues.
Yeah.
But it's definitely you could find it on YouTube. It's a very easy song, but that was like I said, it's kind of a chilling and sad song to begin with. And then the other song that, even though it's more associated with Southern rock, this one really is, and again, also written in the early 60s, but still based on Resurrection Mary itself, is a song called Bringing Mary Home. Same exact story, too.
That's crazy.
If you guys like, after the show, I could send you guys the links so you guys can listen to it for yourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny, like Amanda would know, Aoyama Cemetery is the most biggest, hugest cemetery in all of Tokyo. And all the cab drivers take a sleep in that cemetery. they instead of driving their car, they park. They park their car and they take a snooze there.
Okay, so Robert, I'm sorry, Irene, go ahead.
You wonder what the hell are they doing? Like, yeah, and it's the most haunted cemetery in all of Tokyo too. It's just crazy. Like, why would they be taking a snooze in that cemetery? Yeah.
So Robert White, he just messaged me directly, told me about another song out there that I haven't heard of this one. John English, by John English. She Was Real, another supernatural song. I'm gonna have to look that one up because that's a new one. And the two other songs, though, in spite that they're kind of more teenage tragedy songs because they're ghost story songs. It's no surprise I have them on my Halloween music list.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Do you have any questions about Paranormal Japan?
So, man, it's kind of hard for me to, because you guys know I've been watching your show a lot, and I've been learning a lot, in this case. So it's kind of hard for me to come up with questions. Although, well, I have one at least. I mean, I understand obviously, that it's of course not as popular in Japan as compared to like here in the U.S. or other parts of Europe or not. But I guess my question is, do you guys ever think at all of that maybe eventually interest could grow throughout Japan years from now? Like let's say 5-10 years from now, just as an example. Do you guys ever think it could grow?
The thing is, young people don't want to know anything about paranormal. I find the older generation has some interest, right? Or if you're a clairvoyant, you do. But young people are more analytical. They want to see it. They want to feel it. They want to touch it.
Right.
And if they can't do that, they don't believe it.
That makes sense.
And like the older generation have a lot of knowledge about certain things that go bump in the night. So they'd be open to tell you about certain things, right? But not the young people. And the more educated they are, the worse it is, because the more they will never believe you. But if you have an older generation, like they don't mind. They don't mind if you really want to know, you could ask them questions about it and they'll tell you stories. But not the young generation. And I think it's sad because as property taxes go up, these places are being sold for commercial residents. And the thing is that you're gonna find more hauntings. No, you're gonna find more hauntings. You're gonna find more dangerous situations, multiple dwelling places that rent is extremely expensive here, and they're going to be living in these haunted places, and they're not going to be treasured. They're not going to be treated as an open field that can't be used, but they're selling it for that reason. And believe me or not, right?
Right, yeah.
And it's a shame because historical places with a lot of bloodshed and a lot of stuff happened where a lot of samurai warriors were killed, and they still walk the land. And either they walk the land in an apartment, through the walls, around the walls, anywhere. And they're forced to sell it because the property taxes are so expensive now compared to what they used to be. So what are you going to do, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I'm finding a lot of people here that are into the paranormal, or at least openly into the paranormal, are people who were not born in Japan.
Yeah.
So business-wise, they're not gonna do anything business-wise. They're not gonna open any locations. They absolutely, like, if there's a haunted location, they will board it up. Like, there is another haunted forest in Japan that they fenced off, so there's absolutely no way in. It's supposed to be haunted by a samurai ghost because they won't let you walk in. They're just like, no, it's supposed to be in there, but you're not going to go in there and find out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there has been people, from what I've heard a while ago, try to make businesses out of it here, but unfortunately, due to lack of interest, they had to shut it down just because no one was interested in doing anything with the paranormal. So it's just, any businesses or anything like that, they had to shut down.
Yeah. And they used programs here in Japan too, regular television shows. They show it about at 8:00 at night, and they show particular haunted places. They'd have a medium go in with these actresses and actors, and they bringing them in this area and show them that's haunted and blah blah blah. But yeah, that program is no longer available anymore. So
lack of interest.
Yeah,
there's
been other programs, not on TV, but people have started programs involving educating with the paranormal. But same thing, lack of interest, so they just had to shut it down because no one was responding to them.
There was a show that apparently I honestly don't even know if it was actually a legitimate video that they were talking about, and it was in fact one of the shows I mentioned earlier. It was featured on in fact, they supposedly featured this footage on a segment of Scariest Places on Earth. Now, it wasn't in Japan, but it was. I don't remember what the supposed show was called, because I tried looking up the show after I saw this episode. I couldn't find anything on it, but it was supposedly a Japanese reporter from Japan who wanted to investigate the alleged lighthouse in New London, Connecticut. And he said he claimed that he hosted the show. It was like a mystery investigation show for Japan. And his goal was not only just checking out places in Japan, but also checking out places in the United States. And he said he did this back in 1999. And so he went to the alleged lighthouse. He stayed the night there. And in fact, he was interviewed on the segment. It wasn't just like they were showing stock footage. They actually interviewed the guy. But I tried looking up this, like I said, I tried looking up the show, and I even put down because I thought, well, maybe I'm just not typing in right. So I put in like whatever the title was, Japan or Japanese, to see if it would pop up, and I couldn't find anything. And of course I tried looking up on YouTube, other video watching sites. So I don't know if this was a legitimate show. If they were just like adding it into it just to give it more, because even in the early 2000s, some of the paranormal shows were staged, but not as staged as like what they are now. So whether or not the show actually existed, I couldn't find anything of it. So it's kind of hard to say from what I found.
I think afterwards, I think we could talk, because my Google is a little bit different than your Google.
Yeah.
Google has a lot of paranormal and Japanese content. We could get into that together later on. I could probably see what I can figure out.
Mandela effect. Mandela effect is a real thing, and I think it's because it's they believe you know how everything you do, there's like different, every decision you make that it really leads you to two different, I guess, what realities or dimensions or whatever. So I think it's like more of a dimensions kind of crossing over.
Yeah, that's basically kind of how I see it too. So my friend Kate Frezzi's watching. What's up, Kate? Sorry, I just had to give again, she wasn't showing up in the chat, just want to give that shout out.
Yeah, StreamYard doesn't show all the comments or everyone for some reason on Facebook.
But no, I definitely agree though. I mean, when it comes to the Mandela effect, because I definitely think that there is some like I guess opening, for lack of a better term, to like these different realities and different dimensions that exist. Mm-hmm. And I've never necessarily experienced it for myself, but I do believe it does. It certainly exists.
Oh, if you watch old videos, it might be like advertisement for things. They're like, do you remember when it's like, think about, and they'll say something like, when you think of this advertisement or you think of this photo, you think of it as this. Turns out that doesn't exist, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? That actually brings up something else up, and this was something you mentioned, Irene. Like how, again, the younger generation over in Japan, aren't as acceptful of it as like the older generation.
Yeah.
Even for when I first started getting into the subject at a young age. Although, of course, we did have, again, a lot of these different paranormal shows and documentaries in the late 90s, early 2000s. Growing up, even in school, the interest of before I formed my paranormal club at high school and I was still in middle school, the interest of the paranormal was certainly, I was basically like a minority. Like there was, most people didn't want to talk about it. I mean, I had both kids, teachers, and even these kids' parents go up to me and say, because they didn't believe a lot of this stuff. There was even one time I talked to a social worker about it, showed my interest, and she actually thought there was something mentally wrong with me, even though, she already knew from the very start that I'm on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
But she thought that there was something else. But nonetheless, I had all these numerous people go up to me and say, you need to learn to keep your mouth shut. You need to know that this stuff doesn't exist. Or they also thought originally that I was just saying it to scare all these other kids and staff members. I mean, they really truly believed that I was making this all up. I, even at only 12 years old, I really wanted to prove them all wrong. Yeah. And I was able to successfully do that.
I've had this conversation before with some people working, psychics and other clairvoyants, where it's believed that back in the day, a lot of people in insane asylums were actually psychics or clairvoyants, but because, as Irene says, you can't prove what I see or hear or what I do. So unfortunately, when people say, I see your grandma standing behind you, they'll, all of a sudden you're being locked away in the insane asylum.
Yeah, you're nuts. That's why
Yeah.
I think even to this day I keep my mouth shut. I don't
That's
tell
like
anyone.
what it was with the social worker. She actually thought that there was something wrong with me. And at one point, I mean, it's just like, even when I even created drawings when it came to the paranormal stuff. And I will admit, maybe some of the drawings were a little too extreme. I'm sure they were, but at the same time, though, it was just me expressing my interest in it. And there were, in fact, I still remember this all these years later. I was making this drawing, and it was on the first day of school, and the teacher took it, looked at it weird, and I'm thinking, "Oh shoot! Don't tell me this is going to happen." And then as I'm walking out of school, I see him in the office take the picture over to the office area. I'm like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" Not only was it like, I'm thinking, geez, I just started the school year and already I'm getting in trouble on the first day.
You're already that kid.
Already that troublemaking, middle school kid.
Dang,
And
here we go again, right?
yep, here we go again. But then after that, I mean, it didn't go down as hard as I thought it was going to. But even then, it was still hard for them to understand that I was only writing this stuff because it was my interest. It was what I wanted to be. And even then, I was already calling myself a paranormal investigator.
Yeah.
Even if I hadn't
You
done
were
them
that
yet.
kid they were talking about in the teacher's lounge.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Watch out for that weird Nick kid, man.
Nick Muller, he's a little bit out there,
Well, when I saw that teacher take the drawing and take it to the office, I knew I was definitely in the conversation.
You're screwed. You're screwed.
I was really screwed.
Damned if you don't, right? Yeah.
You're probably that kid they used an example years later.
Yeah.
Well, see, and that's, now that I look back on it, I mean, it may have looked bad, but, it was, I don't regret, obviously, the direction that I've gone to. I mean, if I could just say one thing to a lot of those people that were telling me to be quiet about it, yeah. I mean, I would still have to tell them is that you don't have to believe me even still today, but I know what I've seen. I know what I've heard. I know what I felt. I know what I've even spoken to or even smelled using all five senses. Know what I've witnessed and experienced. These things, that's a part of my life now, whether I like it or not.
I've had conversations with the other side where in person, when you're watching it happen, you're just like, okay, what is she doing? But then when you do the playback is when you actually hear the response back to me. I'm like, yeah, that's what I was hearing.
Yeah.
Right. See, now Kate here on the other side, she just she kind of just made a similar story like that. She just said that when she was 11 years old, she could sometimes see colors around people. Still can. I guess it's like the aura, or to do with my I don't know if I'm saying this right. This is kind of one of those hard to say words. Astigmatism. If I'm saying that, I'm probably butchering that word right now. Well, when I told close friends at school, they said I was a nutcase, so I never told anyone. So, that's actually interesting that Kate had a similar issue like that.
Yeah.
And in this case, she grew up in the UK, which, obviously most British people love a good ghost story, whether they believe it or not. So it's kind of, crazy to think that, even they were telling her that, not that they didn't believe that kind of stuff.
I mean,
yeah, that's why they think back in the day. That's what a lot of people in the insane asylum actually was. Is maybe they weren't crazy, maybe they just had a gift. And unfortunately, especially back then, I know a lot of the public doesn't know how to handle people with gifts now, but it was worse then.
Yeah,
it was worse then, and I think also it was probably harder for me, especially when I was starting up with this kind of stuff, because as a person with autism, I mean, for starters, back then, our understanding of autism was certainly not well understood as it is today. So, even just living life in general with autism was very, very difficult for me.
Mhm.
And a lot of these people just didn't understand or accept what my interests were. You
Mhm.
know, they just couldn't be accepting of it. And that's
Well, they didn't
kind of what.
they put the time in to even try to even help you, so it would be a pain in the butt to even do anything for you, or to even try to find any interest that would help you communicate better with everybody else. So yeah, it's like, yeah, you're in too much trouble, you know.
Well, and
So
that's kind of the way how they saw apparently as a mental health issue, even though obviously by today's standards it certainly isn't. And there were times I was really trying to, even though I have autism, I
mhm.
was really trying to prove almost like I could be as smart as I hate to use the term, as a normal person. I wanted to be
Yeah.
just as
I know
smart
what you
like
mean.
that. And even when I tried doing that with the paranormal and even history,
Mhm.
because not surprisingly, I used to have I would have an aide help me out, or was supposed to help me. Again, growing up with autism, like I said, was very difficult. There was actually some issues I had that kind of did go to, not never went physical, but it was like it did go quick. I mean, it almost went at times to emotionally, vocally, and mentally abusive towards it. So
Yeah.
there was some abuse that kind of did go on, especially in middle school, and I was starting to get into it.
Yeah.
And the aides were definitely some of the worst that I had. And even
Yeah.
when I was trying to like prove that to them that I was trying to be the smart person, even at only, 12, 13, 14 years old, they would just cut when I'm trying to tell them about the subject matter, and they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to even give me a chance. So it was really hard to deal with.
Autism still to this day is not very well. I don't want to say well known. It's not, people are not very well educated, I guess, when it comes to it, because my daughter is autistic, and it's so weird hearing how people, it's the huge change. It's a huge shift in how people treat her from when, they first meet her to when they find out that she is autistic. It's a huge, it is so, it's like that. They completely change how they think of her, how they treat her. And it's just complete, even family members, when they found out that she was, completely thought different things of her. And it's so weird that their thoughts of her changed that drastically, and even the public to this day, because they're not very, I don't know, educated. I don't know the word I'm saying, but it's so weird hearing what people think of her because of the
Mhm.
autism, and it's
Yeah.
like you guys are not even remotely close to being right and what you
Exactly.
think it
Ye-
is.
Yeah, that was kind of like I said, the difficulty I went through. Now, like I said, when I entered high school and I started the paranormal club, there were no issues then. Nobody ever came up to me, even if it was the same kids that said the same thing in middle school. Nobody ever came up and told me you got to stop with this nonsense. Or the school that system never approached me either. They actually thought it was kind of a cool idea. Now, when I first started the club, not surprisingly, not too many kids or even teachers took it seriously, because we, of course, started, at the beginning of October, so at the beginning of the Halloween season. So at that time, I think a lot of people thought it was kind of a joke, but when they saw that it was a real club and
Yeah.
that it was probably one of the first of its kind, again, to be ran by somebody who had autism, um, that was obviously a major change. And like I said, I mean, even though it was difficult at times, the club is still running. Again, like I said, almost 20 years later. So that obviously meant that I definitely did give success to it. But even still, like again, when it comes to the autism itself, it's just, I still often wonder how it's like for kids that go to school today, like what they have to deal with at
It's
school.
still, because they're different, so it's still not easy for kids with autism, and sometimes the way she's treated by other students is heartbreaking. And there's times I've had a fight with the school because I don't feel like they're doing enough to protect her, or they're just,
Right.
it's getting worse because they're not doing what they should be to stop it. And I'm just like, this is getting worse. And this is getting worse and worse. She said she's talked to you. And I was like, regardless if she's talked to you or not, I've mentioned it several times. So I know, at least by me, you know what's going on. But I don't understand why it's still going on. They're like, oh, we separate them in a classroom. I'm just like, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Because they're still able to walk up to her and
Right.
do what they want, do what they're doing to her.
Well, you see, for me, when I was growing up, surprisingly, it wasn't necessarily other kids that treated me differently. I mean, I did have those issues, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but it was really more of the staff members. And obviously, as you could very well imagine, that's even worse than the other kids, because these are the authority figures.
Yeah.
And they it was almost like the best way I could describe it was almost like as if they were trying to prevent me from being fully educated, like other kids were. But and I still, to this day, I still kind of suffer from some of that, but I have not given up and certainly didn't lose my intelligence.
We had to change her schools because the way that school treated her, she wasn't as independent as she should be for her age. And then once we switched schools, we realized it's also mostly because of how much the school is doing for her, how they also treated her. So.
Right. Yeah. I just, you would have thought by now that there would have been a lot of major changes. And although there is, there is certainly a type of change going on, unfortunately, it's still moving rather relatively slowly. So,
fast.
What's that, Irene? Sorry, you cut there for a second.
Not fast enough, and not
exactly. Yeah, it's not moving fast enough. Yeah,
like they're slow as molasses because they don't really worry about it because it doesn't happen to them. So why should I? Right?
There was actually an incident that occurred just about a year ago for me where and this was shocking when I discovered this, but obviously, I mean, with all these different, paranormal friends we got, I get a lot of Facebook friend requests, not surprisingly. And I try to keep up with all of them as much as I can, but there's so many of them that there's just so many of them, I can't keep up with them. But I got a friend request from someone who didn't really know who it was, sure as hell was not friends with any of with you guys or anyone in our paranormal community.
Yeah.
But this person directly messaged me saying, she said to me, sorry, throat was drying up. She said to me, not sure if you remember me, but I was your teacher in elementary school. And I still couldn't really know who it was. So at the time that she messaged, at the time that she messaged me, it was like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning over here. So my parents were asleep, so I wasn't going to wake them up and ask, who is this person? So obviously I was going to have to wait until the morning. So I woke up the next morning, and as I'm getting ready to go to work, I had a minute or two to spare. I said to my mom, hey, this person messaged me saying that she remembered me from elementary school. You know who this is? She looked at the picture and then saw the name. It turned out, unfortunately, she was one of those bad aides I had. And just the reaction that I got from that, I mean, literally, they do this a lot in movies and TV shows all the time. Like when they see like a person of their past who's like, who did something wrong to them, they drop everything and they run off. That was kind of almost the same. That was kind of almost the same thing for me. And I can't even tell you what I really wanted to say to her. Like it was, it would have been ugly, but the only thing that prevented me from saying that was my mom knew what I was going to do. So she just told me at that point just to block her. But that was the only thing that kept me from basically going crazy on that former staff member. So it was just too bad, painful of a reminder of the past. And I didn't want any contact with her. And I know for a fact she didn't find me through, all these podcasts and shows that I've been on. She obviously found me somewhere else.
Exactly. you know, I had a similar thing where I wasn't called really that bright. I I went through school. I did the system right, but the only thing that saved me was learning about the fine arts, and that's what got me through school because I was so different than everybody else.
Right.
And even my mother said, "You're weird." Thanks a lot.
Oh,
But yeah,
jeez.
yeah. I mean, I was kind of like strange, right? I was your normal child, but yeah, there was a lot of weird things that I liked, and I was a little bit out there, out there, I
Yeah.
believe. And yeah, but that's what got me through going to school. And if I want to learn about things that are not that go bump in the night, going to an all Catholic school, you don't talk about stuff like that, right? No,
Right. Right.
no, 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 no.
All
No.
this talk about the when it comes to autism and the paranormal, and this is something that I've been meaning to bring up more often because I was originally supposed to take part in this. With all these paracons that have been going on, there was one paracon that was supposed to happen a few years ago. I got a message from a guy named Jarrett. He's another investigator. Jarrett, I can't remember his last name. He used to live in Iowa, but now I think he lives in Delaware now. And he approached me about a paracon that was going to be happening with downstate at Ashmore Estates, as a matter of fact. At first, I was told that it was going to be just like your typical paracon, like I've gone to all the time. But he told me this one was supposed to be different. I was like, of course, how so? And apparently it is never, they said this was going to be a type of paracon that had never, a type of paracon of this type that had never been done before. It's already, they've already tried making attempts before, but this was really the first time they were really going to try to put together. Not only were they going to make this a paracon, but they were also going to make it an autism awareness event to kind of expose, basically teach and expose kids and teens and young adults with autism and Asperger's as well to the paranormal field. And so what Jared told me then was he sent me this Facebook profile and say, contact this person if you'd be interested in taking part in this. And her name's Candace. And I can't remember her last name, but she's been on podcasts herself. She's even been a guest on the show. I think she was on the second episode of the series. She was on A Ghost Ruined My Life. I just can't remember the last name, but she works with, you guys know Jack Keno, right? You guys know Jack? Yeah. So Jack was also involved in this event, but at that time I didn't know he was. But they were putting this event together for, at Ashmore Estates. And so I approached them, kind of talk to them about this event. And at that time, because it was 5 years ago, I never really had been a speaker at an event before, but I offered myself because obviously there wasn't very many paranormal investigators, at least in that area, that had high functioning autism. And as a person myself who has it, who can relate to a lot of these young people and talk about this kind of stuff, it just seemed like it was a gold mine. It would be a gold mine, basically, because I'd be a gold mine of information to teach a lot of these kids this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, however, the event never went through, not because of lack of interest. This happened in 2019. Obviously, a year later, COVID-19 hits, and at first it was postponed, but then they were going to push it back to like 2021. But as time went on, I started hearing less about it, and before I knew it, I lost track of it. But it was very unfortunate because I actually was looking forward to seeing a autism awareness paracon, like first time ever, and I would have been more than happy to be a speaker of it. But it was worth a try. But it would have been a good way to really expose, teach kids about this kind of stuff.
And you know what? You just hit a really good, strong subject here. How many children who have abilities who could be autistic, right?
That's what I was
Yes.
gonna say is I'm finding a lot of people that are autistic, especially the high functioning autism, seems to have some kind of gift in the paranormal. I'm not quite sure
Yeah.
what the relation is, but I've talked to a lot, I feel like I've talked to a lot of people with autism and they all seem to have some kind of ability in the paranormal.
Yeah.
I've
And
had numerous investigators who've said to me that they believe that I have some kind of gift myself. And I
yes,
honestly believe it. I think it's if that's the case, I think it's just like, every other person who's got abilities. I think
yeah,
it's different for each person, but
yeah,
at the
Yeah, it's
same
like
time
different
though,
abilities, but they have some kind of ability.
yeah.
exactly.
See some kind of thing, and it's just like with me, I'm not your normal average person who I grew up with, a normal average child. I mean, I was really weird, and look at me where I am now, right? I'm
Right.
seeing things that go bump in the night. I'm talking to them too. Like I'll have downright drug out conversation with them right in my room. And it's just absolutely nuts, to tell you the truth, right?
Right.
And I'm wondering, like, am I really like I'm doing this to myself, right? I hope I don't go crazy when I do this, right? Because yeah, it's just absolutely. That's why I don't like going outside anymore. I don't go outside. I just don't. I
Yeah.
can't. I can't. I see too much, and I don't.
That's always one thing I've said is when I came to Japan is I see and feel more things here than anywhere else I've been.
Yeah, and for me, it's really hard to go outside. I'd have to go with my husband, or I'd have to go with my kids, and they'll have to coax me to go outside because I won't. I just
Right.
won't.
Right.
And I'd say, nope, I'm not going to go outside. And they said, Mom, you got to go outside. It's unhealthy to be in your house all the time. I said, yeah, I'm not going out. And they said, I know what you're going through, but I mean, just sit outside on the steps in front of the house is better
Right.
than just, it's unhealthy, they're saying. But yeah, I mean,
See, the
I,
way I also see it too, like again, when it comes to like kids with autism who may have some kind of ability, or gift. When we were trying to put this event together, we also thought this was going to be another good example of, leading this not only just kids to like understand and acknowledge the stuff, not only just them, but of course their parents too. But this was another one of these type of events that we wanted because over here we've had a lot of kids here, including unfortunately some of my best friends from years past who have been making bad decisions, who've gotten
mm-hmm,
involved in crime and illegal activity, that kind of thing. And
mm-hmm,
like where I live, for example, like where Chicago is in Cook County. Now, and we have one of the most notorious jails here, in fact, in the United States. That's the Cook County Jail, which is the largest one too in the country. So
mm-hmm.
to kind of give a note, I guess I'm not sure what you would call it, but basically put it this way: Cook County is a very large, very heavily populated area, and most of the inmates and individuals who work at the facility come from this county. So you cannot walk these jails and not know somebody that from your past. So if it's something that we can do to increase the behavior of autistic and Asperger's kids, teens, and young adults using the paranormal and history as the
Yeah,
subject of interest, we'll do with what needs to be done. And that
yeah,
was, again, I'd like to see something like that occur in the very near future. But again,
yeah.
it's been tough, especially after when I lost track of the one they were going to have at Ashmore Estates.
I'm
Well,
finding, unfortunately, a lot of people that are autistic do have another gift in the paranormal field are more reluctant to talk about it because they're already being treated differently for being autistic. So to add something into the paranormal to that, it makes them even feel even more different than
yeah,
everyone else.
yeah.
Right.
And they want to fit in like everyone else, and
Yeah.
to be secluded and say no, you're different makes it worse because
It does. It really does.
because you have this touchy feely thing, and you can see stuff that other people can't, and it's
See or hear whatever
Yeah.
gift they have.
yeah, it makes it even more difficult when you're in this kind of situation. Like, and I feel totally secluded from everybody else, and I'm sitting here all by myself all the time, right? And it's really difficult.
Well, and that's the same thing too. Even when I'm at work, like I said before. I mean, although I found some people who are interested in this kind of stuff, when I first started working at the grocery store that I'm still working at, at that time, I don't think there's as many now as there were years ago. At that
Mhm.
time, we had a lot more high school and college students working at the store, and about one or two of them came up to me, and I told them, of course, that I was into the paranormal stuff. And I originally thought that they were from my former high school because I was expecting that they would go up saying, hey, you've heard of, well, we got a club here called Paranormal Club, and I wanted to give that a great reveal to it. But unfortunately, that's just not how it originally was going to be. But fortunately, this was one of the few times that I kind of brushed it off because at certain points, I noticed these kids would kind of group together, and there were times that they were kind of turning over to me, like, one of those things that they're talking, that I'm being talked behind, they're talking behind my back or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
But that was one of the few times that I actually tolerated. I'm thinking, all right, I know what's going on here. I know what you guys are doing, but
Yeah.
you guys don't want to believe it. That's fine. But,
Yeah.
I honestly didn't even think it was going to last that long, and it didn't. So that was one of the few times that I'm sure they were making fun of me at that time,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it didn't last long.
No.
Once it started, it was over very quickly because a lot of those kids ended up dropping out and leaving the job.
You know.
Just wanted to go back because Kate actually added more. So Kate says, oh my God, this word again, astigmatism.
Astigmatism? Yeah.
I guess that's how you say it, is her eye, which is more rounded. So it reflects light differently. This is when she was talking about the auras. So she doesn't know if it's paranormal or not, but yeah. Oh, she says actually UK are generally against about this stuff, but there's lots of love for ghosts. Depends on the person. And she
Yeah.
also brings up another thing too, which, not surprising since we've been talking about autism. Of course, she brought up that April, of course, is Autism Awareness Month, and she wears blue
Yeah.
for autism. Yeah. Neurodiversity is beautiful. That's right, Kate. Yeah. She also wrote a sweet message too, saying, "I got superpower. She wished she had as much knowledge as I did." That is true, though. I'm always very good with all this knowledge.
It's funny because yeah, my daughter also had like an autism awareness walk, but they're not doing anything to actually raise actual awareness of anything about
No.
autism. It's like, yeah, okay, we're having a walk about it, but students obviously don't know. If you don't know why you're walking or what it is, it's not doing any good.
No.
Yeah, it's just, again, I'm not really sure how else I could really describe it, but yeah, it's just the whole process. Again, I mean, I know there's some improvement, but it's still going relatively too slow. Like, we need to see a lot more improvement. Not again. I've been hearing it from other schools, from other investigators, and especially their kids who have it. I always, it's not just a U.S. issue. It's an entire worldwide issue that should
Yeah.
definitely be more
Here in
addressed.
Japan,
Yeah.
if you have it here in Japan, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the unfortunate part. So it's just, and especially for those that, like you said, if they're on their own, trying to even adapt to that normal life, is very, very difficult indeed, especially when you don't even have at least that one person that goes up and say, like, hey, why don't we go and play basketball, or let's do something fun? You know, at least gives, even if it's not necessarily learning, it would give like education. It would give them some kind of learning, especially being accepted by other people.
Yeah. I
And
don't feel like the schools are doing a good job of that
where
either, which
she
is
lives,
it's heartbreaking to see.
where she lives is like the boonies. And if you're gonna find anything that's gonna help you, you have to go to the city.
Yeah.
And because they just don't have the people who have the knowledge, the manpower, or anything like that. They're not gonna help you.
Yep.
So you have to go to the city in order to get something done for your child. And yeah, that's the way it is here. And yeah, I mean, we're so used to, because my children were kind of like far behind, and we lived like about 5 hours, no, not even that, 45 minutes away in a different city. And they didn't have any equipment, they didn't have any means to help my children until we moved to here in Tokyo. That's when everything, they had the teachers, they had the manpower, they had the counselors, they did everything to help my children so they get into high school and junior high, at least in high school. So yeah, I mean, it's sad, but that's the way it is.
Josh also just Joshua Lamar, he just made a good point. That is something I've gone through myself. You know, a dark using group that leads to nothing but trouble. And that's not only just something that occurs to kids. I mean, that also happens with adults as well.
Yeah.
And I just went through something like that twice earlier this year. Nothing like extreme or anything like that, but just certain people that were using myself for just only certain purposes. And
Yeah.
they used me until I wasn't to their advantage anymore. But in the end, even though it ended the exact same way, I was able to remove them before they can make any more advances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a sad part of it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I'm still remaining hopeful that maybe eventually there could be a type of Paracon that could be like they could have even made a Paracon like this for this month again, with April being Autism Awareness. That would have, I think that would have been very much a very good
definitely
positive.
Should be in April for that reason, is Autism Awareness Month.
Exactly.
I wish there was more being done for autism awareness. I've noticed even teachers aren't really aware of what to do or how to help autistic children, so they're kind of getting lost there.
Yeah. Sometimes I also wonder too with the paranormal club that I started, like, because to this day I still don't know who runs that club now, but I still sometimes ask myself, you know, where has this club gone since, and who's running it, and if that person is just like me or something like that. There's tons of questions that go through my mind whenever I think about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be better not to know, and I always compare this to, like you said, you don't know the direction it took.
Yeah.
And we always say that if, for example, if Walt Disney was still alive, if you could see Disneyland today, he'd probably be disappointed.
He probably would.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the politics and all the junk that goes on.
Oh God, tell me about it.
Well, it's not just that, it's no longer about the family or the children or keeping that magic alive. It's now more of how much money can I make off of everyone? They're thinking now to the point where you no longer they're thinking about making it so you can no longer just walk around and get in line. You have to make reservations for lines. You can only make 2 reservations at once. So it forces you to walk around the park more. And they say the reason they're thinking about doing this, because if you're forced to walk around a park more, you're going to spend more. And that's the only thing they care about, is how much. And that's why prices for everything is skyrocketed, because they even said they'd rather have the rich families visit than regular families.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not even, and not only that, but also even if you don't have to pay. I mean, even as I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit this, but you know, even as an employee at the grocery store I work at, we've had numerous problems with certain employees and stuff like that, and they're like, it's all about the money and whatnot, but and not only that, just the behavior and that kind of stuff. It's like, for example, like if you not going to go into deep detail, but for example, if you have to go use like the bathroom or something like that, and you go to the break room and you use it, and there's somebody else waiting right outside, but they're not going to wait or anything like that. It's like, it's just this very disrespectful behavior that goes around. And I even said this to myself the other day when I had one of those issues. I was like, does anybody ever remember like waiting anymore? I mean, it's just, the whole thing is just torn apart. It's not even 15, 20 years ago, at least for me, it wasn't like this. Even then it was better. But now it just seems like things are a hell of a lot worse today.
Yeah. It's funny, you won't find much of that here as you'll find there.
Yeah. It's essentially almost like as I would best describe it. I mean, it's almost like a war zone at times. Or a battlefield. You have to kind of almost like fight with what you want to get, or you got to pay for it. That's just the sad part of this whole thing of the way we've been living nowadays. Obviously, I may be the better person, but that doesn't mean, but I'm surrounded by like 15, 20 other people that are just mean-spirited.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's how it is.
Yeah.
Unless we change it, it's not going to change. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, right. It definitely will. No doubt about that.
I haven't seen anything good come out of it at all either,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think when people come here, they're kind of like shell-shocked because we don't do that here, right?
See, and I think to myself every single time, like, when I'm talking to you guys or I'm talking to other investigators from other countries and just hear it's like completely different. I mean, I have to admit, I envy you guys sometimes for that. I really do.
I envy being back in the United States just because the fact is, like I always tell people, I can't investigate here. There's nowhere for me to book an investigation. You can't go anywhere. I mean, it was getting there was places obviously getting ridiculous on prices back in the United States, as you know.
Right.
But unfortunately, at least you have that option if you can't afford it. And here, you don't have that option.
Well, that's why I said we got to go together, Amanda, and I got to drag my husband with me.
And there is a lot of people that, unfortunately, I mean, in Japan, a lot of people on YouTube do break and enter, which is not smart here because that's the one thing I always tell people. That's the first thing we were told is you have to be careful what to do because unlike United States, here in Japan, they are allowed to throw you in jail without a cause for 23 days.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
And the jail here is more strict than the ones back in the United States.
Oh, yeah. I've seen documentaries on it.
Yeah, it's darker, it's colder, it's more strict. Yeah. Like, even when you take a shower, your eyes have to be staring in front of you at the wall. Even if you hear something and you glance over, you'll get smacked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard Japan's prison system has some of the strictest policies in the entire world. So it's never to be taken lightly.
No.
And just because you're done with the 23 days, and this has happened occasionally, where if they really wanted to, they've had, the 23 days of release them, but then as soon as they walk out of the building, there's another police officer waiting for them who rearrests them and re-puts them back in jail for another 23 days. So that is an option for them if they wanted to do it. And they don't have to have a reason. Like, they don't, like, United States, you have to have a reason. Here, 23 days, no reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I never even knew about because just earlier today, I mean, I just saw on the news, obviously, I mean, Chicago's a great city, don't get me wrong, but it does
Right.
have a lot of crime rate. I mean, I think it's starting to lower down, but unfortunately, I used to say this a lot, but now I take back with what I originally said. I originally thought Chicago was like the murder capital of the United States, but now that's no longer the case. They're saying now it's more like down in, I think it's like in Jackson, Mississippi or something like that. I heard it's even
I don't
rougher
know
down
why I was
there.
gonna say Detroit.
Well, nonetheless, in spite of that, Chicago does unfortunately have a murder rate 3 times that of New York City. So, I mean, it's just, even though it's starting to lower down, it's still way too much. I mean, it's just absolutely. I mean, like where I live, it's obviously a very safe area because I'm actually in the suburb areas. But they just talked in the news earlier today that there was there were several break-ins going on the south side of Chicago, and I even said to my mom when I was watching this, I was like, I look at this and these guys that were breaking and entering, you know, they were wearing the hoods, they had masks on. Honestly, I didn't even need to see their faces. I just knew just by their appearance, these guys looked relatively young. I said I would not even be the least bit surprised that they were probably teenagers. I mean, that's the other part too, is that it just keeps getting younger and younger. And even though we have these cameras and stuff, they always figure out a way to get around it. But unfortunately, in the end, even when they're caught, a lot of these guys, of course, end up going to jail for very long periods. But again, I understand where you were coming from, Amanda, when you were saying that they just throw you in for no reason.
Yeah. No, that's one thing. And I tell people, because they're always like, why don't you try and do that? I'm like, no, in effect, I could be thrown in jail. Just be thrown in jail? No.
No.
I'm not. That doesn't sound smart to do.
But there's a way.
Exactly.
There's a way. And, you know, fortunately, I think I'll drag my hubby and we'll go together. Because he can tell them, he can talk to them. He has a good way to
Exactly.
Sometimes they'll do that to foreigners, keep throwing them in the jail until their visa runs out, and then it's like, oh, you gotta go now, buddy.
Yeah.
And that's when they stop throwing them in jail, is when you're forced to go to the airport and leave.
Yeah, like going back to the home country, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's when, once your visa runs out is when they'll stop, because you're forced to go back.
Jeez. Huh, I would have
like, how's your time in
Japan?
That. I spent it in jail.
Yeah, jeez.
Who you charged with? I wasn't.
See, I'm just glad that didn't happen to my sister and brother-in-law because they visited Japan a couple years ago on their honeymoon. Although they didn't just go to Japan. They also went to, I think they also went to some other parts of Europe. I think they went to Europe first, and then they traveled out to, I think it was, I do remember they went to Japan. However, for them to get back home, they couldn't drive, they couldn't fly. I don't know what the full reason was, but because of whatever the case, they couldn't fly back from Japan to the United States. But they did end up getting an air flight, but they had to be flown actually to Hong Kong next, which is where they were able to get their flight so they can fly back to the United States.
Because the flights come from Mexico, Canada, America, Mexico, Canada, and then from Canada to Japan, from Japan to Hong Kong, and back the same way.
Oh, that's right. Okay, that makes total. You know what? Now that you said that, that makes sense because when they were going out to when they flew back, I think it was Canada they went to. If it wasn't Canada, it was somewhere up in the Northeast, not far from the U.S.-Canadian border.
Yeah.
So
that's their route.
Yeah.
That's the route. They have still that route even to this day.
Okay.
Japan Airlines has that route. If they flew from All Nippon Airways like Anna, they'd be able to fly directly from Chicago to Japan and back. Because they opened up the route. Because Japan Airlines is part of a different company they're hooked up with. And
Japan is with United.
Yeah.
United Airlines?
Bond
Yeah,
Airlines.
United Airlines.
United
Okay.
Airlines. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Josh like can never be a flight attendant.
10 hours in the air. Yeah, you'd be like,
Oh, you'd be
Oh,
exhausted by the end.
it's over 12 hours from the United States to here.
yeah.
Oh, I definitely believe that. I mean, a flight like that, I can certainly see it would take that long.
Don't forget your Nintendo game while you're going.
Oh yeah.
Dang, because you're gonna spend a long time in the air, right?
I have not been up in the air for that long, at least not yet, but I've already been kind of telling myself when that day comes, I better be prepared for it. But
Yeah, I
no.
mean, because I'm still waiting for you to come.
I'm still working.
Luckily, my flight had movies you can watch to make it. I mean, I had stuff to keep myself occupied, but once I saw they had free movies, I'm like, I'm just gonna watch the free movies. And unfortunately, not all planes have beds, though.
No.
The first class might, but you first class on a 12-hour flight is at least $5 to $30,000.
Oh my gosh, jeez, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's what I can't afford. I wouldn't be able to afford to be a first class because a lot of them with the beds are, from what I've seen, like 20 to 30 grand, and I'm just like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got the money to spend it, go ahead. But there's no way I'd ever have that much money to. There's no way I'd have that much money to spend on a first class ticket for one flight.
The flights usually leave at nighttime, so when it leaves America, it'll be like 5 or 6 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And in the air for dinner, and then you go to bed, and they wake you up for breakfast, and then you arrive at noon. I'm kind of like used to it, right? I've flown all over the place, so I'm so darn used to it. Nothing.
See, surprisingly, I mean, the only time that I've ever truly like left the country, well, it was not by plane, it was by cruise, and this was back in high school. But this is the only time that I've ever again gone to any countries outside the United States, and so far I've only gone to just like certain areas of like it's more on the edge, but southeastern Mexico I've been to, and also Jamaica. Those are the only two other. We've also been close to the U.S. Canadian border, but didn't actually enter Canada just yet. So, but trust me, these last few years I've been really wanting to expand beyond the border so I can go out to a lot of these. Not only Japan.
Canada used to be so easy to enter. Like, I remember there used to be a time, because being from Michigan, I had a lot of people who'd go, and the drinking age was 19. So 19 in Canada, I believe. So I had a lot of friends when they turned 19 would go to Canada, go drinking. And at that time, they didn't have to have a passport. They just used like their
like
driver's license or ID. I mean, I think that's probably changed now. Obviously, it's probably all changed since.
Yeah, it's pretty much been stricter since that, and not just for the U.S. Canadian border. Same with the U.S. Mexican border. It's practically
both. That has to be a lot stricter.
Oh, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot stricter, but whether you go basically to the north side or the south side, in the end, it's all the same. They basically have made it a lot more tougher for a lot of people across the board. Although to this day, it's not uncommon for people on both sides. Like if they got a job in Canada or in Mexico, or vice versa, if Canadian or Mexican residents have jobs here in the United States, it's not uncommon for them to cross the border several times if they have to go to work.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun for me. I'm gonna lose.
But you probably have a Japanese passport, which is the strongest passport in the world.
I have a Canadian passport. But
okay, so it should be easy if you go back to Canada with a Canadian passport. But yeah, if you have a Japanese passport, that is the strongest passport in the world.
Well, I'm gonna be losing my Canadian passport. I gotta get my Canadian passport in order to get a Japanese passport and a Japanese citizen. So I'm gonna
Wow.
that this year.
Robert here now says on my side, like a flight to Australia, and in this case also to San Francisco, 18-hour flight from he said from his area in Australia to San Francisco International.
Like it's only 7 hours from here to Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
So plus another 7 hours, right? Yeah. Kind of like used it. Heck, I've been everywhere.
That makes me wonder now how long it would take to get from my area to Australia. That now I'm kind of Robert. You kind of made me curious now on that.
It's funny. Hawaii is basically like Okinawa to Japan, where it's part of Japan, but it has its own culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I can't explain it. Like the food's different, the culture's different. Hawaii's the same thing, where the food's different, the culture's different, but it's still part of the United States.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, also, and these are the U.S. territories too of Guam and American Samoa. It's actually more closer to the Asian continents, and also not even that far from Australia as well. Like they're still considered part of Oceania, but in the case with these two countries, I mean these two territories, they're considered territories of the United States, but they're not states just yet.
From us to go to Okinawa, it'll be about a couple hours. From where Amanda is, it's closer, so it's like an hour from where she is to go to Okinawa.
Yeah, it only take a couple hours.
For me, for Tokyo, I'd have to go. Either I have to go from here to where Amanda lives, take another airplane from where she is, and go to Okinawa. So I'd have to hop on two. It's just
Josh mentions about come to Texas. Different parts are definitely different cultures. I actually believe that, and it makes sense because, as you mentioned, with different parts of Texas having different cultures, that would probably explain why, even though it's not going to be happening anytime soon, that actually explains why there's been talks about wanting to, because Texas is such a big state, about wanting to cut it into, because I've seen sites about like they want to cut in like 4 or 5 separate states because of the different cultures and whatnot.
Yeah. Just one place I want to go to. It's Ogasawara Island. It's part of Tokyo, but it's a little island away from Tokyo, and they don't have any airplane service. You have to go by boat. You have to go by ferry, and it takes 1 day and a half to get there. But my husband knows of a person who works at Costco where he works. They have recovery service because after World War II, there was a lot of bodies that deteriorated, and they're just bones now. So they're recovering bones and bringing it back to Tokyo to be cremated. And I bet you that island's haunted too.
Oh, I'm betting it probably would be.
Because I think I saw videos of that, and it was.
The shore is loaded with just bones on this particular part of the island.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they're picking up the bones. They have a helicopter service now. They're helicoptering the bones to Tokyo, so they can go. I don't know if they'll be able to do any DNA service center or whatever, but they're processing it and they're calling the families up. And I bet you there's a lot of Americans who also died on that island too, just as bad as Okinawa, right?
Right.
And haunted Okinawa is, right? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of these little islands that was in World War II that they're just starting now to recover the bones from these dead soldiers and bringing them back to the city.
I can't even imagine, especially for any families that still to this day have still not gotten the remains of, basically their grandfathers or great grandfathers at this point.
Um,
It's
it's an ongoing process. It's really slow, apparently,
yeah,
because there's so many. Like the shore is just covered with bones. Apparently, what the guy said.
almost like an island graveyard, as I
Yeah,
would put it.
yeah, and it's a really long process of bringing the people with helicopters because you can't go unless you have a ferry, and there's no commercial airplanes that are going into that island. So it's a resort island now where you can go to a hotel, you can have fun, and you can go to the beach like Okinawa. But yeah, I mean, imagine doing that for a job.
That actually makes me wonder, because since you brought that up, that just made me thought of another place that would have that makes me wonder if they ever recover any. I mean, I don't think they would have it as like if there are bones, I don't think there'd be as many, but you still kind of wonder if it happens every once in a while. And another big spot that occurred, of course, during World War II, undoubtedly was Omaha Beach. You know,
Yeah.
the fact that there was a lot of bloodshed that was being fought over on Omaha Beach, and they're still finding pieces of arsenal and debris that was found from the war, and it almost makes you wonder, like if they ever find bones too, because a lot of those there was so. I mean, I know they did recover a lot of the bodies from that beach, but I'm sure there were many more others that were probably swept away by the currents because it happened right on shore, and many the soldiers that got off those I don't know what they were called, but you know those big tank things. I'm not. Or what they were like giant boxes, and the door went down. They flew out. Some of them never even made it onto shore.
Yeah, and they went on these big, huge boats, and the it open up, and the other soldiers would come out onto the shore. Yeah.
Josh also mentions another place, not a beach, but looking through Auschwitz. Oh my God, that is a place. I've only ever seen like not live or videos, but I've only seen two websites where there were actual investigators that tried to investigate Auschwitz. That is a very, very difficult place to investigate.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if I could.
I don't know if I could either. I think this just
I think it's too hard to do that, right?
It's just basically a place of true death, and just the energy around it. Whether or not you believe the paranormal, you know, in that scenario, you would just feel the energy immediately. It's
I think it'd be too emotional, too difficult to even stand around there and just feel everything. And yeah, I mean, that's the time when you feel that you're better off not having an empath ability when you go there. There's another beach, apparently, I've heard this from my aunt and my uncles. It's on the, not where I live, but it's on the other side of Japan. It's called Yamashita Koen. It's a park, and off the park there's a beach. I mean, and I heard from my uncle and my aunt said, you do not go to that park and do not go to that beach after 9 o'clock. Why? What happens? What happened? What happens there? The spirits will take you away and you won't have any body. I said, what happened there? Long time ago, war. During World War II, they used that beach for the soldiers to come on the land. And that beach is really haunted. But I tried to look for any information of it.
See, Robert also brought up another place in Japan. He said he would think Iwajawa would still have bones as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of little islands off in Japan, up in Tokyo. They're all part of Tokyo. But yeah, there's all these little islands that are packed with probably bones and debris and everything else like that. And yeah, it's just, you're not going to hear anything, right?
Right.
Unless you know of a person of a friend of a friend of a friend. That's the only time you're going to hear. They're not going to tell you. And I'm looking for information off of Yamashita Koen. I can't find a single thing. But you know what? They closed that park after 9 o'clock. I mean, they boarded it up. They put they put chain link fences around the park so you can't get in there.
Right.
And you know what? That's called an urban legend, but I wonder how much of it is true, right?
Yeah, because I always believe, and I'm sure we all do, is that there's always a shred of truth to these urban legends.
And I said, how old is that? Well, ever since World War II, that's how old it is. I said, ooh, okay, that's kind of interesting. And here I'm searching on Google for it. I can't find a damn thing about it, right? So where am I going to look?
Exactly.
And finding it in this country is like, good luck.
Japan has thousands of urban legends, thousands of them.
Yeah,
which makes me wonder.
Find something about it, you ain't gonna do it because you ain't gonna get there because no one's gonna tell you.
This makes me wonder because now I just thought of another question for you guys. Do you guys ever have like any type of like historical societies or like any city halls or libraries that regard history or anything like that?
No, we've had people trying to reach out to us trying to get information on, like there's been professional research teams try to reach out because they can't find any resources. They're like, well, maybe you know of secret sources maybe you can use that we don't know of. And they're like, we don't have sources either.
No.
We just don't have them here.
It's like the record. It's almost like as if the records had been lost.
Yeah, they just
Or they don't want to write it. They don't want to write it. If they write it, they burn it. Right?
Yeah.
Because I tried to find something about the old place where I used to live, the condo where I used to live. I think you know about, right? How haunted it was, right?
Yeah.
I tried to find out what the land was, but what made the land so bad. Good luck, right?
See, the only time that I've ever really found any history, like not necessarily a certain location, obviously, I mean, I think we would agree, like, when it comes to something like World War II, that's obviously an exception, like with, the pictures and whatnot. The only other, there she is. The only other time that I've really ever uncovered like full details of something involving history in Japan is, all this talk that we've said earlier, like when you mentioned about the tsunamis, Irene, is the worst earthquake before the 2011 one. That was the one over 100 years ago in 1923, the Kanto earthquake, if I'm saying that correct. Mm-hmm. And that one, I mean, I actually even had thoughts of wanting to do a Nick Files episode. I forgot. Unfortunately, I forgot it was last year that the 100th anniversary came up. But
right, one in Kyoto, right?
Yeah.
Inside
Kanto, yeah, that was the one.
Yeah.
And I heard there's I think there's actually I saw it on Wikipedia a few days ago, but they say in response to that earthquake from 1923, there's like a certain day in it happened in September, and they say there's a certain day in September that's called here I'm actually looking it up right now. Oh yeah, they said beginning in 1960, every September 1st is designated as Disaster Prevention Day in Japan to commemorate the earthquake and remind people of the importance of preparedness. As of course, August and September are the peak of the typhoon season. So,
yeah. And you know what? They're waiting for a big one in Tokyo because we had 2 already. It wrecked my wall and I had to get my wall fixed. But yeah, that's another story. But we're supposed to have one more big one here.
It's probably going to be similar to the one from 1923 because they always say, I mean, like when it comes to it's just like any other disaster that we hear about. I mean, there's always the belief that if an earthquake like the devastating one from 1923 can strike, it can strike again. And there's obviously something foreordained about the destruction of that earthquake.
They're just waiting. Like everyone knows it's going to happen. Like everyone here in Tokyo knows it's going to happen, right? That's why we call it Earthquake Alley here.
Right.
And everything starts in March and it goes right throughout till July. And you're going, yeah. Like last time when it happened in the morning, I said, I'm going to go back to bed. 4 a.m. You got to be freaking kidding. Good night. And I didn't want to everybody holding the furniture. I said, if the china cabinet falls and breaks all my dishes, who gives a shit? I said, I'm going to bed. Like hell, if I'm going to hold up my china cabinet, like, I don't give a hell. I don't care. I don't give a hoot. I'm going to go to bed. I'm exhausted, right? And yeah, it's just like I'm so darn used to it now. It does like not a hair on my chinny chin chin. Like, yeah, so what? Okay, good night. And it's just something that I think I've become numb to it now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, everyone. With it getting pretty late, we're going to end it here for now, but we are going to ask Nick to eventually come back.
Yeah.
So we're going to have
definitely
more long conversations with him.
Yeah, I got to admit, I didn't expect that we were going to go for this.
We always say this. I'm like, we're going
to talk.
Well, and fortunately for me, I didn't really have much going on for tonight anyway. So this actually really made my night.
Yes,
well,
we'll have you back for sure. We'll definitely get in touch with you about scheduling to come back. But we do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you guys so much for having me. This was great.
No problem.
It was
all right, and thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it. Bye for now.
Bye.
Yeah, good night.